Welcome back to Eternal Perspectives, the podcast edition. My name is Leland. I'm your host and the author of the Cosmism Manifesto, a series of essays which I'm writing that explore a cosmic layer of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ and how it applies and scrubs through the scriptures. That's what we've been doing. This is episode 17.2. We're exploring essay number 17, and it's the second part of the video breakdown of this, because in our first video, we only got through Elijah and Elisha and Joel. So about 100, maybe 200 years of history that we kind of scrubbed through. From 950, we're gonna jump to about 750 BC, starting with Amos here. So let's jump down into it. This was all Elijah, Joel, and then coming down into Amos. And I apologize. Last video, I did a lot of pointing with my pointer, and I assumed everybody could see my cursor and was talking a lot with that assumption, and my system wasn't capturing it. So I've adjusted my capture software, so now that you should be able to see what I'm pointing at with my mouse. So I apologize for that. But let's jump in. So we've hit about 750 BC, and here I've got the timeline once again snipped out to where we're at. So here we were just talking about Joel, and he's warning that in the days of Uzziah, there would be the terrible judgment and day of the Lord. So he's prophesying that there's a catastrophe coming to humble the kingdoms of the world, especially the kingdoms of Israel. So Amos is we're going to jump over to the other kingdom, to the northern tribes again, and we're going to get the same warning from Amos, basically backing up the prophet Joel in the other kingdom here. So this is kind of the idea. And also I have a map here of this is what this area looked like about 721 BC. So this is after Assyria makes their moves and takes captive the 10 tribes and comes down into the north, and their kingdom expands. But this is where Assyria was located, right above the northern kingdoms of Judah. And you have Babylon and everything here down further this way, south and further east. But these are the two kingdoms here that are going to basically wrestle for power and then ultimately overwhelm the nations of Israel. So first, it's the Assyrian, and he comes down here from the north. And the capital of Assyria is Nineveh here. So that's important to understand that Nineveh, when it's being preached about with the prophet like Jonah being sent to Nineveh to cry repentance unto them, and then they do repent, right? And he's kind of sour about it because that's not the same kind of experience that any of the prophets down here in the kingdoms of the chosen, Zion spawn, are reacting. So it was quite the contrast for Jonah to experience that. Just interesting. But this is the lay of the land, the geography of where we're talking about and where we are in the timeline. So I'm tempted to include Bible Project summary video for each of these biblical prophets. And I would say I recommend it wholeheartedly for everyone. If you're going to read my stuff and study my stuff, be sure to watch these summary videos from an outside the church source looking at these biblical books as well, because they'll paint kind of a general picture for you to see how the story is perceived by everyone. And then we get to enhance it, enrich it, and give it more color and life and wings with the restored gospel perspective, as well as this cosmic layer that's additional. And, well, I would say it's foundational. It's part of it. So let's see. I recommend soaking in their work and summaries as you read these scriptures for yourself. Watching one of their summary videos has been invaluable for me to grasp the big picture of an Old Testament book before diving into the specific details. I want to focus on their breakdown at the beginning of their Amos summary, where they highlight how the Lord creates a big target through Amos's warnings to the surrounding Gentile nations, placing Israel at the center. The same themes of planetary idolatry and pride, they lead to God's judgment upon the tribes, marking the beginning of their scattering. So this video is going to show from an outside perspective the consistency with which we're scrubbing through the scriptures and finding planetary idolatry, this idol worship to weird animal gods and things like that, or the gods of the surrounding Gentile nations. This is planetary idolatry. So for them to say it in a different way, it's just another witness and testimony that we're on the right track. But let's watch this. I want to watch the whole thing, actually, and then we'll go into some specifics. So we'll take the time to watch this here.
The book of the prophet Amos. Amos was a shepherd and a fig tree farmer who lived right near the border between northern Israel and southern Judah. Now, the north had seized its independence about 150 years earlier, remember 1 Kings chapter 12, and it was currently being ruled by Jeroboam II, a successful military leader. He won lots of battles and new territory for Israel, and he generated lots of wealth. But in the eyes of the prophets, he was one of the worst kings ever. His wealth had led to apathy, and he allowed idol worship for the gods of Canaan, which in turn led to injustice and the neglect of the poor. And it got to the point where Amos could couldn't take it anymore. He sensed God calling him to go trek up north to Bethel, an important city that had a large temple, and start announcing God's word to the people. And this book is a collection of his sermons and poems.
Remember that this Bethel here, this is the same one set up by Jeroboam the first, his father, or well, his namesake there. So, and it's planetary in nature. It's Baal and Asherah worship that was set up here in this northern kingdom. And all these prophets are warning against planetary idolatry.
Poems and visions uttered over the years. They were compiled later to give God's people a sense of his divine message to the northern kingdom, and it's a message we still need to hear today. The book has a fairly clear design. Chapters 1 and 2 are a series of messages to the nations and Israel. Then chapters 3 to 6 are a collection of poems that express Amos's message to the people of Israel and its leaders. Chapters 7 through 9 contain a series of visions that Amos experienced that depict God's coming judgment on Israel. Let's just dive in. So the book opens with a series of short poems that accuse all of Israel's neighbors of violence and injustice. And this is kind of odd because the book's opening line said that Amos was going to speak against Israel. But watch how this works. As Amos is naming all of these neighboring nations, you can go look at a map and see that he's creating a circle. And when he's done, Israel lies right in the center, like a target in the crosshairs. And on Israel, Amos unleashes a poetic accusation that's 3 times longer and more intense than any of these others. He accuses Israel's wealthy of ignoring the poor and allowing grave injustice in their land, specifically by allowing the poor to be sold into debt slavery and then going on to deny any of these people legal representation. And this, Amos asks, is this the family that was once denied justice and enslaved in Egypt? The family that God rescued from oppression and slavery? The party's over, Amos says. God is done putting up with you. And so the opening.
So I just love this. This is a recap of all the same sins we saw the kings of Israel falling into with slavery, idolatry, and sexual sins and lasciviousness and all these things, breaking the commandments of God. Like this the ultimate inversion to practice the slavery, whether it's financial slavery through usury or whatever means. It's contradictory to the nature of Israel having been delivered from slavery to go right into perpetuating it themselves. So again, this is just the whole wrap up of judgment against Israel. And this target here is indicating, as we said here, this target area is a zoomed out view of where planetary catastrophe will strike during the day of the Lord. And just like we saw in the days of Elijah and the days before in the threshing floor of Ornan and David, that this catastrophe was coming from this Gulf area and right across the face of Israel down through the southern kingdoms. This was where the target and the major disasters were constantly reoccurring and passing by or passing over, causing damage this way. So this target's obvious in terms of repeated hits from the Lord, but here it's explicit and plain that this is going to be the target area for a catastrophe from heaven. So the cosmic collateral of the forewarned judgment is how I titled this, that there's going to be judgment, not just for Israel at the center. Obviously, they're the ones that are the most guilty, right? Well, to whom much is given, much is required. And here Israel is the center target. But all these other nations, as they're denounced in these first 2 chapters of Amos, are also guilty of, sins to their own degree. So the visions Amos presents in chapters 7 through 9, including the plumb line I referenced in earlier essays, they follow the pattern of cosmic catastrophe like the Exodus. Let's actually watch the rest of this video where he's going to kind of go over some of these things. I think it's valuable moving forward as we'll dive with a new angle covering this stuff. So this will be a good summary to lay our cosmic layer on top of.
The beginning of the next section explains why. God says, I chose you, Israel, from among all the families of the earth. This is an allusion to Genesis 12, how God had called the family of Abraham to become God's blessing to all of the nations. And so then God says, so this is why I will punish you for all of your sin. Israel had a great calling, which came with great responsibility, and so their sin and rebellion brings great consequences. Now, this section brings together a lot of Amos's poems, and you'll see a few key themes repeated over and over. So first, he's constantly exposing the religious hypocrisy of Israel's wealthy and their leaders. And
another just thought that I'm having as I'm watching this too is that, think about this. Amos is appearing and prophesying right before the true scattering of Israel. They've been divided and they're fighting each other, but they're still close together and everything like that. what is happening here is that we're about to witness the true scattering of Israel, and this is kind of the last call to repentance, the last cry from a prophet, to warn that this is about to happen.
Describes how they faithfully attend the religious gatherings, giving offerings and sacrifices, all the while neglecting the poor and ignoring injustice. And Amos says it's all a sham, that God actually hates their worship because it's totally disconnected from how they treat people. God says a real relationship with him will transform a person's relationships. And so Amos's call to true worship is to let justice flow like a river and righteousness like a never-failing stream.
Isn't this the same message of Elijah when he laments that the people's hearts weren't changed even after witnessing the miracle of God, and that the king hardened his heart more and Jezebel wanted to kill him because of it? Or Joel, who's also lamenting and telling us that it's a change of heart that the Lord wants, not outward covenants ripping our shirts for no reason but not to change our inside sins. This is the same consistent message all prophets preach, and here you have Amos repeating it.
Now, these two words, they're super important for Amos and actually all of the prophets. So righteousness, or in Hebrew, tzedakah, refers to a standard of right, equitable relationships between people,
And again, think of our plumb line: righteousness, upright, rectitude, like Zedek, like we've talked about here. This is the same idea. This is the authority of God, the righteousness of God that all men aspire to, essentially. And it's a key principle in all cosmology and comparative mythologies as well. They have a similar name to tzedek, or righteousness, and it's called different things.
Matter their social differences. And justice, or in Hebrew, mishpat, refers to concrete actions that you take to correct injustice and create righteousness. And so both of these are to permeate the life of God's covenant people like a rushing stream fills a dry riverbed. The next theme is Amos's repeated accusations of Israel's idolatry. So remember, when the northern kingdom broke away from southern Judah, their king built 2 new temples to rival Solomon's in Jerusalem, and he placed a golden calf in each. Remember 1 Kings chapter 12. Since then, Israel had only accumulated more idols, worshiping the gods of.
So here you have, like we saw, all these planetary idols that come in, and these are all, when we explore through the thunderbolts or comparative mythology, all of these images here represent the planets and thunderbolts from the sky, and a whole pageantry of Passovers involving close passes with the planets of our very own solar system. The planets and the comets and the meteorites and the debris out there in space that we are constantly running into. That's what this is. So to ignore that, like, I feel like so many members are like, oh yeah, not Asherah, Baal, these are just idols and blah, blah. And like, there's no connection to the cosmic. There's no connection to why it was so tempting for the Israelites to easily slide into this kind of worship. Well, when you understand their circumstances, their context, what they actually went through and what they witnessed and said they went through, well, then it starts to make a lot more sense. It becomes a really coherent picture that is not weird or odd or peculiar. In fact, this becomes the norm when you look at all ancient cultures and their witness.
Sex and weather and war. And in the prophet's view, the worship of these gods always led to injustice, because these gods don't require the same degree of justice and righteousness as the God of Israel, not to mention that these gods were immoral themselves. Not the God of Israel, he's different. So he can say in one place, seek me that you may live. And then right after that say to Israel, seek good, not evil, that you may live. So true worship of the Creator God of Israel, it's synonymous with doing good, with generosity, and with justice. And so the final theme in these chapters is that because Israel and its king have rejected Amos and the other prophets, God will send the day of the Lord. This is a great and terrible act of justice on Israel. And specifically, Amos predicts that a powerful nation will come and conquer and decimate their cities and take the people away into exile. And
now, here's where I pause and say, yes, there's a nation that comes down. The Assyrians come down and actually do take them captive. And again, remember David's options given to him by the angel with the episode at the threshing floor, that he had 3 options of judgment. 3 days of the sword of the Lord, 3, years of famine or months of famine, I can't remember, or 3 months being destroyed or chased by the sword of man, right? You had these options. It doesn't just come one, right? Especially if the party called to repentance is unrepentant. God was going to send all of them, right? It's going to be a mix of all of them. They get the famine, they get the whirlwind, they reap the whirlwind of a cosmic destruction, as well as they become captive to these Gentile nations who are more obedient in many cases to God and the powers of heaven than the very Israelites who understood them or were supposed to understand, had the necessary pathway to understand them through the gospel that was given them. Or through the law of Moses, which was a schoolmaster for the gospel. So, I like to push back on that to say, remember, we're enhancing our vision. We're adding layers. A lot of times when these types of stories are talked about by people studying the scriptures, they want to interpret it in one way specifically, and they don't keep their options open that there are many levels of judgment, many armies, instead of just, armies of men. But there can be, like we talked about before, the terrible ones, an army of cosmic destruction of meteorites and bolides and all kinds of things that can come down and are immutable, immovable, immortal, essentially, as they come down to burn the land before them and behind them.
We know his prediction came true. Some 40 years later, the Assyrian Empire swooped in and did exactly as Amos had said. The book closes with a series of visions that Amos experienced, and they're symbolic depictions of the coming day of the Lord. So he sees Israel devastated by a locust swarm, and then by a scorching fire, and then they're being swallowed up like overripe fruit. And in the final vision,
so just remember, everything we've talked about with Elijah to Joel, to all these catastrophes and Moses and the Exodus, what precedes them, what happens during them, and how is it like? These are all the same patterns. It's repeated over and over again. It's not different things. It's the same mechanism, cause and effect, that God uses to judge and punish his chosen people from heaven. He uses the stars.
Amos sees God violently striking the pillars of Israel's great idol temple at Bethel, and the whole building comes crumbling down.
And this is reminiscent here. This striking of a false altar is very reminiscent of the Tower of Babel and Nimrod having set up a false temple to false planetary gods, right? Thinking he can or outsmart God, essentially, in the priesthood and the authority and the order that has set out before him through keeping the narrow way, keeping commandments. It's the same destruction of such false temples.
It's an image of God's justice on the leaders and the gods of Israel. Their end has finally come. But then, all of a sudden, in the final paragraph, we see a glimmer of hope. It picks up this image of Israel as a destroyed building, and God says that out of the ruins, he will one day restore the house of David. In other words, he's going to bring the future Messianic king from David's line, and he will rebuild the family of God's people, which, surprisingly, we're told, is going to include people from all of the nations. All of the devastation caused by Israel's sin and God's judgment will that day be reversed. Now, this final paragraph is super important. It's the only sign of hope on the other side of judgment. And it helps us see how this book is exploring the relationship between God's justice and his mercy. If God is good, he has to confront and judge evil among Israel and the nations. But his long-term purposes are to restore his world and build a new covenant family. And so through Amos's words, we still today hear his call to learn from Israel's hypocrisy and disaster and to embrace a true worship of this God, which should always lead to justice and righteousness and loving our neighbor.
So these concepts, he's talking about justice, righteousness, mercy, these are what the Lord himself called the weightier matters of the gospel. The things that people who are frivolously chasing beyond the mark issues, they avoid these issues, the righteousness, the justice, the mercy of God, and how wickedness is punished. This is a perfect tapestry to lay over what Amos and Joel are describing as Judgment Day, the great and terrible day of the Lord, that both his mercy and his goodness, his judgment, his justice are exercised in equal and harmonious and king-like fashion in righteousness, done the right way, where the wicked are punished and the righteous are blessed through being protected through catastrophe, and not just protective, but excelled, to be healed, to be lifted up through it all, to be elevated and exalted through the challenge and through the fire. So moving on. Now we can go into here. The visions Amos presented in chapters 9 through 7, or 7 through 9, including the plumb line I referenced in earlier essays, follow the pattern of cosmic catastrophes like the Exodus. These visions point to the end-time gathering of Israel, when the Messianic King, Jesus Christ, will restore the house of David to its divinely promised position of authority over the earth during the millennium. But his visions and warnings also pointed to immediate judgment upon ancient Israel in Amos's day, by the same famine-inducing, sun-darkening, plague-bringing, fire and brimstone raining, earthquake and lightning unleashing upheavals. Velikovsky has much to say regarding Amos, and this time in Worlds in Collision, the book. He calls the catastrophe of Amos's day a rash, R-A-A-S-H, or commotion. It's mentioned in both Amos 1, verse 1, and Zechariah 14, verse 5. He makes the case that this was a planetary encounter. So let's read both of those references he points to. I have them right here. So the commotion of the days of Uzziah, he's claiming, was a regional earthquake caused by a cosmic event, a Passover. So Amos 1, verse 1 and 2, it says, "The words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah." So there he is, the days of Uzziah. "And in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake." So 2 years before this event happens, before some big earthquake, enough to be called the earthquake, right? And he said, "The Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the inhabitants of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither." So he's pointing explicitly back to Elijah, which they knew had just happened. That experience had just happened to them, where he's talking about that same type of catastrophe that happened in Elijah's day. It's coming again. It's going to come. Now, in Zechariah 14, verses 4 through 5, here's what we read. "And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem in the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and towards the west." This is second coming language, splitting of the Mount of Olives when the Lord returns. "And there shall be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it towards the south." This is implying a big earthquake, right? "And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountain, for the valley of the mountain shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah." So Zechariah is definitely pointing towards the second coming and the return of Christ to Jerusalem from the east, which will split the Mount of Olives in two and create the Valley of Decision that's talked about in a lot of prophecy, right? In these final battles, the final scenes before the whole world is put under his reign and rule. He's comparing directly that event of that mountain splitting and that catastrophe of the future to the earthquake during Uzziah's day that Amos and Joel and Isaiah even later is warning of a repeat of the same thing. They're all talking about this same catastrophe coming from heaven. Let's dive in. In Worlds in Collision, chapter 1, he goes on about Amos for a bit. Let's read this. Why won't this open up? Oh, it's because I'm in edit mode. That's why. Yeah, I found some typos. Like at the beginning of my essay, I had Elijah and Elias, and it's Elisha, and I kept doing that when I was posting the video, so I had to make some corrections. So let's do this. I'm going to pause it and just switch it so you don't see me do that. All right, man, like magic. I'm back. I'm done, and I can click on this, and it'll get big. So here we go. Chapter 1, Worlds in Collision, Amos. About 750 years passed after the great catastrophe of the days of the Exodus. So add 750 to 750, or about, what is that? 1500 BC, like we're talking about in the Exodus. That's what he's talking about. So about 750 years had passed since Venus was the one attacking the earth. And now, as we've discussed earlier with Velikovsky's points about Joel in these days, this 8th, 7th century BC, is that Mars takes over as the prominent planet in the sky causing disturbances. Whereas before, 750 years before, it was Venus. So, okay. During all this time, the world was afraid of the recurrence of the catastrophe at the end of every Jubilee period. Like we talked about before, about every 50 years, they were watching the stars very closely, watching Venus's movement. Then, starting about the middle of the 8th century before the present era, a new series of cosmic upheavals took place at intervals of short duration. It was the time of the Hebrew prophets, whose books are preserved in writing, of Assyrian kings, whose annals are excavated and deciphered, and of Egyptian pharaohs, of the Libyan and Ethiopian dynasties. In short, the catastrophes which we are now about to describe did not take place in a mist-shrouded past of 1500 BC. The period is part of a well-authenticated history of the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean. The 8th century also saw the beginning of the nations of Greece and Rome. The seers who prophesied in Judea were versed in the lore of heavenly motion. They observed the ways of planetary and cometary bodies and, like the stargazers of Assyria and Babylonia, they were aware of future changes. In the 8th century, just think of that, those few paragraphs right there and how that blows many people's minds. They wouldn't understand this. But what he's saying is plain. He's saying, now we're going to talk about some catastrophes where I'm going to point out that a planet is the cause, and it's well documented. It's not like I'm going out on a limb here finding ancient scrolls from the pharaohs of the 1500 BC, of, way, way back. There's so much documentation from these different thriving nations and civilizations that we all recognize today, like he's named, right? And all of them point to the planet Mars, point to these things happening as he's describing. In the 8th century, in the days of Uzziah, the king of Jerusalem, there occurred a devastating catastrophe called rash, or commotion. Amos, who lived at the time of Uzziah, began to predict a cosmic upheaval before the rash took place. And after the catastrophe, Isaiah, Joel, Hosea, and Micah insisted unanimously. Now, he includes Joel after Amos. And this is where I mentioned in the last episode, there's some discrepancy as to when Joel lived. So, like I said, I'm going with the church's definition. They put Joel before Amos. So whatever the truth is, they're both talking about the same thing. He says, Hosea and Micah insisted unanimously and with great emphasis on the inevitability of another encounter of the earth with some cosmic body. The prophecy of Amos was made 2 years before the rash. He declared that fire sent by the Lord would devour Syria, Edom, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia, and as well as the far-off countries, with a tempest of the day of the whirlwind. So here's the east wind, the whirlwind, this swastika-type lightning blitzkrieg strike from heaven. That's what it originated and is, right? And he's claiming this is happening again. The land of Israel would not be exempted. Great tumult would be upon its mountains, and great houses shall have an end. And he's quoting Amos scriptures with those words there. And you can see if you're following along the different verses and chapters he's using. He will smite the great house with breaches and the little house with clefts. Amos warned that those who invited the day of the Lord and waited for it, woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you? And then he says, because the day of the Lord is darkness and not light, even very dark and no brightness in it. He's like, you're asking for catastrophe. You don't know what you're asking for, to go back to the Stone Ages, essentially, with our technologies and our systems and our governments. He's like, this is what you're talking about. He's talking about world-ending destruction from the stars. Amos, the earliest among the prophets of Judah and Israel, whose speeches are preserved in writing, reveals the concept of Yahweh in that remote period of history. Yahweh orders the planets. And here's a quote he says from chapter 5, verses 8 through 9. And we're going to go into this in a bit of depth. He quotes, he who maketh, bracket, ordains, Chema and Kesel, and turneth the shadow of death into the morning, and maketh the day dark with night, and calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord Yahweh is his name. He strengtheneth the spoiled against the strong. So he's using the scripture as evidence that Amos was teaching that Yahweh orders the planets. He governs the planets. So let's look into what he's referring to as Chema and Kesel, because in our King James Version, that's not what's said there in chapter 5, 8 through 9. In fact, I have it right here, so let's check it out. This is a Velikovsky tangent on how he quotes Amos 5:8 there. He uses the Hebrew Chema and Kesel, spelled Khima, Chema, and Kesel, Khesil, where most Bible translations use the Pleiades and Orion. Okay, so this is where there's going to be a difference of opinion in Velikovsky and what is common even in our King James Version of the Bible. It identifies the word Chema and the word Kesel as the Pleiades, as we see them today, and as Orion in the constellation as we see it today, right? Or it says the 7 stars and Orion. The Pleiades are often known as the 7 stars, 7 sisters. They're a group of 7 stars that kind of look like the Big Dipper, near and part of Orion, or near Orion in the sky. So like the Pleiades. Okay, I had to pause it there. Here's our King James Version below, and the footnotes for 8a and 8b, the and stars. I've also included an image of the constellations and their relative position in the sky. Okay, so here we're going to read what it says in our King James Version, Amos 5, 6 through 8. Seek the Lord, and ye shall live, lest he break out like fire in the house of Joseph, and devour it, and there be none to quench it in Beth-el. So he's talking about the northern kingdom here. Ephraim and Manasseh, the house of Joseph, they're the ones right on the border there. And who is Amos coming to condemn? Basically them, right? But this applies to us too in our day in terms of the second coming, that we are the house of Joseph over the wall here in America now and across the globe amongst the Gentiles. And the same fire will break out and devour us if we do not seek the Lord, if we do not turn to him, right? And seek his mark and protection. Verse 7, ye who turn judgment to wormwood and leave off righteousness in the earth. I have a lot to say on wormwood, but I'm going to leave it for now. Seek him that maketh the 7 stars. So there's the footnote I'm referring to. There's a footnote on the 7 and stars, right? And Orion. And turneth the shadow of death into the morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. So that first here, the 7 stars, the reference, it says down here, i.e. the Pleiades, just as we said. And then when it says stars, it just says go to the topical guide and look at astronomy. But this is essentially, it's the same message, okay? We're going to go into some of the specifics. What Velikovsky says, it's the same as what we see here, that Jehovah is the king of all the planets and stars. Like, it's the same message. I'm being pedantic, and so is Velikovsky, but I think it matters in terms of understanding that the alternative history of our planet and close proximity to Saturn at one time are kind of carefully dismissed and scrubbed by a lot of people. And the early Christian scholars and even those involved in the translation of the Bible, Nibley talks about this a lot. They systematically sought to dismiss cosmism, or the natural cause and effect, stars to Earth, in the scriptures. They thought that it was a Gnostic heresy and it was too materialistic, etc., in the later days after Christ's crucifixion. So there's a whole debate about this, and I believe that this passage, this understanding, might fit into that category of reconsideration. Let's look at these things again, given a Saturnian history of our planet, and not just assume that when it's talking about the 7 stars in Orion, or this Kima and Kessil as it is in Hebrew, that it's not talking about the Pleiades or Orion, that this constellation here. So here's Orion, the constellation, and then Orion, normally he's shooting a bow, is what it looks like. That's how I was taught, that he's shooting his bow here. I guess it is a lion-shaped bow. But he's shooting it at the bull, at Taurus, and Pleiades is part of that constellation, the Taurus here. So it's just interesting. There's a lot more to say, I'm sure, in even the astrology or astronomy of constellations in our day. That's a whole nother layer that we can apply to the gospel. But for me, I don't approach that yet, because we're not done going over the foundation, going over convincing or presenting a compelling argument that planetary history on Earth involved the same planets in our solar system being much closer together in a different type of system, and that changed. And that change, where we were able to see these constellations in the sky, only really transitioned after the flood. And so the way we perceive what is being meant by certain things is a bit skewed, because most people dismiss that even happened, that the planets changed, that the flood even happened. And this is what Peter laments in 2 Peter 3 when he's talking about. They deny, essentially, that the flood happened, but it did. The old heaven and the old earth passed away and were flooded, and the new heaven and the new earth are held in reserve for fire, as he was describing, that people today dismiss that these things happened. And I think this, I've beaten that horse a little bit. So here's another comment that I like here, just from, if you go to Bible Hub, and you can go to any scripture you want in Bible Hub, at the bottom they have a commentary section where a lot of Christian commentaries are given and shared and just kind of presented in a big cluster for you to look at. And I like this here. This is some commentary on this verse 8 about the stars and Kima and Kessil. Jameson Fawcett Brown Bible Commentary. It says, the 7 stars, literally, the heap or cluster of 7 larger stars and others smaller. The former whole passage seems to have been in Amos's mind. He names the stars well known to shepherds, to which class Amos belonged. And this makes sense to me, too, him being a shepherd and talking about the stars a lot. Orion as the precursor of the tempests, which are here threatened, and the Pleiades as ushering in spring. Now, this is where I would say, okay, yeah, and that probably is true, that these constellations were, alive or in the sky during certain times, and they signaled different seasons and whatnot. I'm not saying that it can't apply like that, but to focus on that it's just about the seasons or the springs, or it's just about the mating season of certain animals, and that's what these symbols all represent. To talk about the planets is blasphemy. That's how a lot of people treat this. When I'm saying, no, include them all. Include them all. The planets, the animals, the seasons, the nature, like how it operates is cohesive. They're not separate and disparate. So don't just, I'm doing it again, where like in the Bible Hub video, or the Bible study, Bible Project video, where they're talking about Amos prophesying an army coming down, and they're saying it's the Assyrian army, and I'm saying, well, wait. Open your mind. Yes, there was a physical army of men, but also an army of these cosmic bodies that we're talking about, the terrible. Like, there are other layers that get dismissed when somebody grasps onto an explanation or an interpretation. They're like, this is it. This is the only one. It's the only one that fits. It's the only one that makes sense, because they're not looking for other layers like this. They're not looking at the planets. He says the shadow of death is a Hebraism for the densest darkness. And it's also a Hebraism for what happened during the Exodus as they walked in the shadow of death in the tail of a comet. Calleth the waters for the sea, he says. He says, both to send deluges in judgment and the ordinary rain in mercy. So there he's applying it to like a catastrophic application, as also the seasons. So it's like, I don't think that he's totally just saying it only means this, But many people will read this and then go to church and pretend that it only means this because that's all they're aware of. I'm saying don't do that, but look and include it all. I am. Accept that rendering. Look, I accept that rendering and translation. What he says here, all this about the stars, the seasons, darkness in general, and just general like interpretations of it. It makes great sense, as Amos was a shepherd by trade and would have had a keen eye for specific patterns in the night sky. Now, I can also entertain that there may be more immediate planetary application or a layer of interpretation and remembrance of the same Hebrew ideas, like a heap or a congregation of stars or planets. That's what he's talking about. Kima and Kesel actually mean. Kima, in Hebrew, it is a heap, a cluster. So is it accurate for them to apply it to the seven sisters, a little cluster of stars? Absolutely. I'm not arguing against that. But I'm saying our paradigm, this was a heap. The polar configuration of planets was a cluster. It was a mound, a mountain, a beehive, all of those symbols we see on temples, ancient, across cultures. That was a heap. The beehive shape, the mountain shape, Zion shape, this shape, the Alpha and Omega shape is a heap. It's a combination, a body, a man standing, right? A corpus, a group of organs. That's what a heap is. So it applies to this as well. And Kesel equals a strong one, or the fool is what that name means. And Mars was explicitly described as a strong one and the fool for constantly, with his size, repeatedly going to battle against the larger Venus. And in these giant lightning exchanges, he was the fool. Now, here's what Velikovsky has to say about these two words. Amos, the earliest among the prophets of Judah, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, we read this earlier. So this was his interpretation of the Kima and Kesel, where he puts Kima and Kesel there. And then here's his footnote to 4, right here where it says Kima and Kesel. In his footnote, he says, the material for the identification of Kima as Saturn and Kesel as Mars will be presented in a subsequent part of this work. And it's presented in his new book, In the Beginning, pages 42 through 52. All right, let me back up and explain this one more time. These pictures I have right here are from Worlds in Collision, where he mentions Amos 5:8 using the Hebrew Kima and Kesel. And the footnote says, I'm going to identify why these are identified as Saturn and Kesel as Mars, Kima as Saturn and Kesel as Mars. And I'm going to do that and present that material in a later time. And it's in this book. So if you're interested, I don't know if I included it in here to read or not. I thought it was a lot of pages. So I was like, I'm just going to show people where it's at. Y'all can go read his very good case for this. I'm just presenting it here as this is part of my paradigm, that I understand Kima and Kesel, or the stars and the seven stars and Orion, as we see it in the King James Version rendering. I see that not just as, the constellations and it's a shepherd talking about shepherd things, but as he's remembering this ancient configuration of a transfigured millennial type paradise earth. And that's what it was, that he's the one that orders that and disordered it and will reorder it at the millennium, which is what Amos is seeing. And Joel is seeing, and Isaiah is seeing, and Elijah saw, and all these prophets, even Moses, could see that the whole idea wasn't just to have this kingdom on earth and be awesome, but it was to ascend to Zion, to this very heap that existed before, like Enoch, to go up into the planets to the higher degrees, to be exalted amongst the celestial kingdom. So Velikovsky draws from Job 38:31, which reads, the waters are hid as one with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. 31. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? So here, Job is using the same two constellations, Pleiades and Orion, which in Hebrew, it would be the same Kima and Kesel. So if we just swap those for Saturn and Mars, let's read how that says. It says, canst thou bind the sweet influences of Saturn? And think about binding of Saturn with the rings, right? That happened after the nova of the flood. So this fits in that context where he's talking about, aren't you the one that basically bound Saturn? Or loosed the bands of Orion? How are the bands of Orion loosed in a constellation setting or context? Seems interesting. Maybe they're talking about his arrows because he's releasing bands, towards Taurus. And that might be the mythology or the stories around Orion the hunter. But even more, the bands of Orion would be the binding of Mars to this central figure here. When he was released and came unhinged like a hammer, he was the one, the strong one, who came and was feared after Venus had let go of him, had released him from her womb, from her lap, from her contact, from her touch, from her sexual union, right? He was released from it. So Velikovsky drops from this scripture. Now let's move to the next. He says, canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in its season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with the suns? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Okay, we can break down those two as well, with the Mazzaroth and Arcturus also having these cosmic affiliations and parallels. So I want to jump to that verse 33, where he says, knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Like the planets themselves are ordered by God. This is the same notion that Jehovah is the king of the planets, the king of the heavenly hosts, and that they have ordinances, rituals. They have order to them that is controlled by what? If it's controlled by Christ, it's controlled by the priesthood. It's controlled by faith. It's controlled by light. So Velikovsky draws from that scripture in Job and the Babylonian Talmud to explain how Kima is Saturn, was seen as a cooling influence, while Kessel, Mars, was associated with heat. Now, in the experience of what happened with Saturn versus what they were experiencing with Mars, it's the same. Saturn brought water and cooling and all kinds of like leaving Earth alone, hanging from nothing, right? Where Mars, when it would approach and bring, it brought great terrible fire and heat and pitch and burning oil and all kinds of things. So this aligns with Pliny and other ancient writers who ascribed similar attributes to the same planets. To Mars, there was a heating force, and to Saturn, a cooling force. He supports further his argument by identifying Mars' moons, Phobos and Deimos, as we've talked about, as the reins or the belt or cords of Kessel referenced in Job. So when he's saying, canst thou loose the bands of Orion? He's talking about the reins of Orion is how that is interpreted as well, like being reined in. And shows that Mars was often depicted as foolish or rash in mythology, particularly in Homer's Iliad, where Ares Mars repeatedly fights the stronger Pallas Athene, or Venus. He makes more compelling points. You should read his books. They're great. Either way, these phrases in Amos and Job fit both within a Saturnian framework as well as a traditional zodiacal interpretation. That's a good way to put it. I didn't remember that I figured that out. So that is the talking about the seven sisters, like our King James version does here. This is a zodiacal interpretation or application of what he's talking about. But what I'm saying is that it's plain to see as well that it also applies to the dissolution of the polar column of the Saturnian configuration, with Saturn and Mars being Kima and Kessel. Now, the idea of a heap or cluster of stars is exactly what our restored cosmological framework implies existed in paradisical creation. Points 7 and 9 of our plumb line support this. Remember, here's our list of different restored doctrines from Joseph Smith and the scriptures that we should base our view on the cosmos on. And number 7 and 9 say what? The earth was formed near a different star or planet, and that it was a congregation of planets sharing a common axis. That would be a heap or a cluster of stars, a family of stars. Just like we look at the Pleiades and we say, oh, that's how we used to be. Look at how close they are together, right? Or we look at the Big Dipper and see that form of planets in a line. Or we look at Orion's belt and we see the 3 planets in line. And somewhere deep down in your blood, you remember what that is. Continuing with his musing on the prophecy of catastrophe by Amos. Here's Velikovsky. Amos prophesied, the land shall rise up wholly as a flood, and it shall be cast out and drowned as by the flood of Egypt. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord God, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the day in the clear, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. The flood of Egypt, this is Velikovsky's commentary on that quote from Amos. He says, the flood of Egypt mentioned by Amos may be a reference to the catastrophe of the day of passage at the sea, but more probably it refers to an event within the memory of the generation to which Amos spoke. So he's saying, yeah, this could be the flood and then passing through the Red Sea, but likely it's something that the people there witnessed and remembered that he's referring to. So he says, let's explore what that could be based on other records. Here's how he goes. He says, in the reign of Osorkon II of the Libyan dynasty in Egypt, right? So he's looking at a neighboring Egyptian dynasty here. In the 3rd year, the 1st month of the 2nd season, on the 12th day, according to a damaged inscription, quote, the flood came on in this whole land. This land was in the power like the sea. There was no dike, D-Y-K-E, of the people to withstand its fury. All the people were like birds upon it, the tempest suspended like the heavens. All the temples of Thebes were like marshes. So there's a Libyan Egyptian record of sometime close to Amos's day where all of Egypt seemed like it was underwater in a marsh. That is not a seasonal inundation of the Nile. Dang it, let me re-say that. That it was not a seasonal inundation of the Nile is clear from the date. So this is why he said the date, because the calendar date for the high level of inundation does not at all correspond to the place of the calendar in the seasons. On the day of the approaching catastrophe, Amos says, there will be no place of escape, not even Mount Carmel, rich in caves. Though they climb up to the heaven, he's quoting in Amos 9:2-3. Though they climb up to heaven, so in the mountains, thence will I bring them down. Think of the Tower of Babel as well. Them fearing a catastrophe, fearing a flood, and climbing up into the tower. Though they climb up to heaven, thence will I bring them down. And though they hide themselves in the top of Carmel, I will search and take them out thence. This is Velikovsky. Earth will melt as the sea. Earth will melt, and the sea will be heaped up and thrown upon inhabited land. And quote, and the Lord God of hosts is he that toucheth the land, and it shall melt. He shall calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. Amos 9:5-6. And yeah, we see that as the second coming, but again, we're saying it applied to something that was witnessed and experienced in their day as well, locally or regionally. Amos was persecuted and killed. The catastrophe did not fail to come at the appointed time. In anticipation and in fear of it, King Uzziah went to the temple to burn incense before the prophesied day. The priests opposed his appropriating their functions. So he went, and he wasn't supposed to do what he did, and he did it because he was fearful. Suddenly, quote, the earth started to quake so violently that a great breach was torn in the temple. On the west side of Jerusalem, half of the mountain was split off and hurled into the east. Flaming seraphim leaped into the air. Earthquakes act suddenly, and the population has no means of knowing about them in advance in order to flee. But before the rash of Uzziah, the population escaped from the cities and fled into caves and clefts between the rocks. Many generations later, in the post-exile period, it was remembered how the population fled from before the rash in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And that's the quote from Zechariah that we read. So he's saying, normally earthquakes happen and there's no forewarning. So why did these people flee? They knew that there was something coming. They knew that a calamity was coming because it was cosmic. That's what he's suggesting. Because it was seen in the sky to come. And it was prophesied that that would be the thing that would cause these earthquakes and major disruptions and burning of the land and total desolation. So they wouldn't have run from an earthquake they didn't know was going to happen. The year 747. Next session in Velikovsky here. If the commotion of the days of Uzziah was of global character and was brought about by an extraterrestrial agent, which is what I'm saying he's suggesting, and he's saying he's suggesting, now he's going to check himself. He says, it must have been caused by some disturbance in the motion of the earth on its axis and along its orbit. Such a disturbance would have made the old calendar obsolete and would have required the introduction of a new calendar. So he's like, if such a thing disrupted the earth in the way that it was described, it should have disrupted the calendar and the way that people keep time. Well, guess what? In 747 BC, a new calendar was introduced in the Middle East. And that year is known as the beginning of the era of Nabonassar. It is asserted that some astronomical event, some astronomical event gave birth to this new calendar, but the nature of the event is not known. Now, we'll read ahead in a second, but let's skip back and talk about Nabonassar just for a second. Historical accounts suggest an irregular earthquake during King Uzziah's reign echoed this prophecy, which, let me read that again. Historical accounts suggest an irregular earthquake during King Uzziah's reign echoed this prophecy, with many fleeing into caves before it struck, which Velikovsky is noting as odd. The unspoken obvious conclusion he draws from me is that they saw something coming and ran to the hills and caves and hid their faces, much like the princes of Ornan at the threshing floor. Remember, when they saw the angel standing above the mount, the princes of the king of Ornan fled and hid their faces from it. They saw it. When they looked back and saw the angel of the Lord threatening, this cosmic disturbance, a possible Passover event, is speculated to have altered the Earth's axis, making calendars obsolete at the time. This may have led to the introduction of the new Nabonassar era in 747 BCE with a new calendar. So he's saying this here. Let's just look at the wiki entry for this. Nabonassar from Wikipedia. He was the king of Babylon from 747 to 734 BC. He deposed a foreign Chaldean usurper named Nabushuma Iskun, bringing native rule back to Babylon after 23 years of Chaldean rule. His reign saw the beginning of a new era characterized by the systematic maintenance of chronologically precise historical records. Both the Babylonian Chronicle and the Ptolemaic canon begin with his ascension to the throne. So he's saying other records and chronicles that are well respected amongst historians began with this guy's reign. He was a contemporary with the Assyrian kings, Asul-Nariri, 755 to 745 BC, and another one. The latter under whom he became a vassal, and the Elamite kings. So he gets captured by these Assyrian kings as well. But That's Nabonassar. Now, calendar reform is a section right here in his article. It says, his reign marks the reform of the Babylonian calendar, introducing regular calculated intercalary months. The 18-year cycle texts, the 223-month Saros cycle, named for blah, 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 this is unimportant to me, and perhaps even the Zodiac, blah, 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 that it was from the reign of Nabonassar onward that the movements and duration of the stars were recorded. So it's like something happened, and then they were on it, keeping a record of all the heavenly bodies and motions, and everything started over. So this is what Velikovsky's alluding to. He said he continues to point out that this new calendar was brought on by some mysterious astronomical event. Now, in the beginning era of Nabonassar, otherwise an obscure Babylonian king, was an astronomical date used as late as the 2nd Christian century by a great mathematician and astronomer of the Alexandrian school, Ptolemy, and also by other scholars. It was employed as a point of departure of ancient astronomical tables. This was not a political or a religious era. Further back, there was no certainty in regard to the calculation of time. It is from that moment that the records of eclipses began, which Ptolemy used. What was the astronomical event that closed the previous era and gave birth to a new era? According to retrospective calculations, there was no eclipse of the sun in the region of Assyro-Babylonia between the years of 762 to 701. If the earth has revolved and rotated uniformly since then, which is taken for granted. So he's saying, I don't know if I buy that, but if you take for granted that everything has been in its order as it has been, there should have been no eclipses of the sun during these years where obviously something happened to change the calendars. He says, Uzziah reigned from about 789 BC to about 740. The last few years of his reign, beginning with the day of the commotion, he spent in seclusion, having been pronounced a leper. Interesting. So during this commotion, he gets sick from the sky. This is what I was thinking was happening to, who was the king that we just talked about that married the daughter of Jezebel. Can't remember his name. It'll come back to me. But he fell through the lattice and was injured, and I was thinking it might have been plague-like caused on by a coming catastrophe, but it wasn't in that case. It is in this case with Uzziah, who got sick during the same time. It was apparently the upheaval of the days of Uzziah that separated the two ages. Time was counted from the commotion of the days of Uzziah. If this conclusion is correct, the upheaval took place in 747 BC. The computation according to which the era started on the 26th day of February must be re-examined in light of the fact that further cosmic disturbances occurred during the decades that followed 747. It is worth noting, however, that the ancient inhabitants of Mexico celebrated their new year on the day which corresponds in the Julian calendar to the same date. Across the world, you say, across the globe, across hemispheres, that they celebrated a new calendar year on the same day? That's pretty strange. The first day of their year was the 6th and 20th day of February. And that's a quote. The chronographer and Byzantine monk Georgius Syncellus, one of the chief sources of ancient chronology, synchronized the 48th year of Uzziah and the first year of the first Olympiad. So you're talking about the first Olympiad occurred in the year of some cosmic event. But according to modern calculations, the first year of the first Olympiad was negative 776 BC. That seems like a contradiction. The Olympiads most probably were inaugurated by some cosmic event. The text of the ancient Chinese book of Shiking refers to some celestial phenomena in the days of the king Yen Yang in 776 BC. The sun was obscured. If the occurrence of 776 BC was of the same nature as that of 747, then Amos's prophecy was a prognostication based on an earlier experience. So he's saying the Olympiad was supposedly started and inaugurated by some cosmic event, and that happened this year. He's saying Chinese records also indicate that something happened with the sun being obscured and a cosmic event happened that same year. So he's saying Amos's prophecy then wasn't just declaring something random that was going to happen that had no precedent for the people, but that it was a prognostication. Now I say it's revelation, and I wouldn't say it's prognostication, right? But this is what he's saying, is that there's evidence that the same thing he's talking about happening in the days of Uzziah had happened before, previously, had been experienced. Velikovsky concludes that 747, when the calendar changed, is the year of the commotion of Uzziah, what Amos warned about and compared to the second coming. Retrospective calculations suggest no eclipse in Assyro-Babylonia between 762 and 701 BCE, but other ancient records, such as those from China, and I'm kind of summarizing what we just read, but it's okay, such as those from China and Britain, refer to celestial phenomena like obscured suns around 776 BC. Why did I do BCE? Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should just keep it BC. I'm an idiot. Coinciding with the first Olympiad. That's before this rash of Uzziah. So Velikovsky makes the assertion that Amos was basing his foreboding warning, note, his name means burden bearer, is what Amos means, of the future on previous planetary close encounter cataclysms. The language was familiar to his audience, the threat extremely credible. This is why you had the king actually going to burn incense and everybody fleeing before it happened. They understood. As Velikovsky mentioned earlier, tradition has it that Amos is murdered, but the catastrophe still came. You should be able to, and again, this goes back to Elijah's lament about Jezebel wanting to kill him and Joel, nobody listening to him, and same thing here with Amos, gets martyred. You should be able to read chapter by chapter in Amos at this point and highlight and see the language of catastrophe he employs liberally. And think about the beginning of the Book of Mormon, where you have Jeremiah and Lehi and other prophets being raised up in Jerusalem, condemning the people, saying, you killed the prophets, you kill the prophets, you people who kill the prophets. Like this is why. We're seeing it in action. And when Jesus comes, it's the same thing. Once again, we find that the whole book is a positive test. Even the obscure or hotly debated translations like Kema and Kessel or Orion and the Seven Sisters, they are clarified in a unified way. Even my pedantic disagreement here, or Velikovsky's disagreement, it doesn't take away from the other zodiacal layer that is presented always. So that's what I'm saying. It clarifies it in a unified way, brings this story together and makes sense of these prophetic utterings. So let's explore almost the whole 9th chapter in Amos as an example. For my commentary, listen to the audio version. All right, so this is just me pointing out we can now find the language of catastrophe that we're talking about as we read through this. So here's the chapter heading of Amos 9. Israel will be sifted among all nations. So this is talking about the scattering, right? We're talking about the prophets of the scattering, and Amos is right before it really starts to happen. So this is a big picture view in prophecy, as it's always shown, like this is the purpose of what God's doing. This is why it's happening. Israel's going to be sifted among all nations. In the last days, the people of Israel will be gathered again into their own land, and it will become productive. So this is the promise part, the good part. It says, Amos 9, verse 3 is where I'll start. And though they hide themselves in the top of Mount Carmel, I will search and take them out thence. And though they be hid from my sight in the bottom of the sea, thence I will command the serpent, and he shall bite them. Now, is he talking about sea monsters coming to get them? Well, maybe. I could leave my mind open for that. But this seems like a very similar idea to, he's talking about, he's going to come with cosmic catastrophe. And so the serpent of cosmic catastrophe, the Leviathan of cosmic proportions, there's nowhere you can hide, not in the bottom of the sea, because the oceans are going to be upheaved. They're going to leave their bounds. They're going to be called to the north to preside over the earth, right? You're not going to hide neither at the top of the mountains, which will be melted and touched first by this lightning. Right? So he commands the serpent, and he shall bite them. Remember, we talked about the whole serpents in the wilderness and the lightning nature of them, the flying nature of them, the biting nature of them. This is the same idea. And though they go into captivity before their enemies, now he's talking about that other judgment. See, this is like a cosmic judgment. He's going to find them with the sword of the Lord. And here's the sword of man. And I will command the sword, and it shall slay them. And I will set mine eyes upon them for evil and not for good. And the Lord of hosts is he that toucheth the land, and it shall melt. So here we have, again, the hand and sword of the Lord talking about this. This is the hand seen out of the sky of Elijah's servant, right? The hand of the Lord coming. This is the sword being pointed at Jerusalem by the angel of the threshing floor. This is cosmic judgment and catastrophe, and it's what melts the mountains. And it says here, verse 5, and the Lord God of hosts is he that toucheth the land, and it shall melt. And all that dwell therein shall mourn, and it shall rise up wholly like a flood, and shall be drowned, as by the floods of Egypt. So we talked about that. Verse 6, it is he that buildeth up his stories in the heavens. Interesting. And hath founded his troop in the earth. And he hath called for the waters of the sea and poured them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. This is language of catastrophe, then and future. Verses 8 through 15. Behold, and this is the sifting and the gathering. So here you have first catastrophe, the reason that they're going to be sifted, and then he ends it with the promised gathering of why that matters and what will happen. So let's finish it out. He says, behold, the eyes of the Lord are upon the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from the face of the earth, saying that I will not utterly, destroy it from the face of the earth, saving that I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob, saith the Lord. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. And all the sinners of my people shall die by the sword, which say, the evil shall not overtake nor prevent us. So he's saying the hypocrites of my people are going to be overtaken and taken captive. Then he says in verses 11 through 15, I've highlighted in green because this is the promise of the gathering. He says, in that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof. So he's talking about not just the land of Jerusalem, Israel coming back together under a king, the righteous Davidic king, his own body being born as the tabernacle, but also a temple like the tabernacle of Moses or the temple of Solomon, or of like these ideas. He's saying it will be done the right way in the end times. And that's what we see today happening with our temples today. Like we see that as the fulfillment of these temples, these tabernacles of the kingdom of David being raised up. But then a more full, complete, cosmic completion of it when Christ himself comes as the promised David, as the promised King of Kings, as the promised tabernacle to stand on the earth as a heap, right? And bring us back into paradise, bring us back to the day of rest of the Lord. Verse 12, he says, I'll finish verse 11. In that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof. Now the breaches, remember, during the catastrophe, the temple was ripped apart. And I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. Or this is even talking about the temple of Herod's day, or after Christ's destruction, the destruction of Jerusalem, when every stone was turned and brought down, right? All those breaches and everything, all those ruins will be raised up like the resurrection. Verse 12, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, of all of the heathen, that they are called by my name, saith the Lord that doeth this. Verse 13, behold, the days cometh, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that soweth seed, and the mountain shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. So he's talking about there's going to be a time of paradise coming where the plowman will overtake the reaper, meaning the crops are coming to harvest even faster than they can be reaped, right? He's ready to plow the field and put the next seed in. Or here, the treader of grapes, so him who's making the wine, treading the grapes, in the trough with his feet or the whatever tools they have, he's saying he won't even be able to finish before the guy's sowing more seeds and planting again. And I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall build the waste cities. So he's saying, I'm going to bring them out of captivity, and they will build up all these cities that will be destroyed after this destruction and then judgment, and inhabit them. And they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof, and they shall also make gardens and eat the fruit thereof in them. And I will plant them upon their land. So this is him promising to put us back in our promised lands. And they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God. So that's the millennial gathering, the millennial fulfillment of Israel achieving Zion society under the King of Kings, under Jesus Christ himself, who will reign. So I think it's beautiful, and we can see it clearly, this pattern of this prophet Amos, like all prophets, saw the scattering and gathering of Israel with clarity. Just as we see President Nelson today sees the gathering of Israel as the most important thing happening on the earth today, because it is the fulfillment of all of these things that these prophets spoke about, cried about, lamented about, wrote about, and were martyred for. A kingdom centered on Jesus Christ. Now, I always include a lot of the scriptures and readings, I'm sorry, but I also want to encourage you to read the scriptures for yourself. Test this planetary cosmic layer on other chapters and books that I haven't included, and when I'm not around. I know that the Holy Ghost will lead and guide you to be edified, and you will have your own sacred moments of learning and an increase in spiritual momentum. My intent is to teach you how to use the paradigm, not to point out every answer. So just as a recap. All right, we have reached Isaiah, but unfortunately I've got to run and do some work, so I'm going to pause it here, and I will pick this up in a couple hours when I'm back. So you will wait a few seconds, and I must wait, although I want to right now. And I'm back. Look how fast that was. Okay, let's jump forward to Isaiah, the messianic prophet. And I have a little subheading here that says, he lived through catastrophes and prophesied of future catastrophes. Isaiah receives his prophetic vision after Amos. Isaiah begins to prophesy during the days of the commotion of Uzziah, what Velikovsky was calling the rash, forewarned by Amos. He lives through this period of catastrophic cyclical encounters about every 14 to 15 years with the planet Mars and sometimes Venus and disturbances of our moon. So let's read a little section he has. This actually came before what we read about Amos in Worlds in Collision, but I have it included in proper order here. So let's take a read. This is Worlds in Collision, a section titled Isaiah. According to Hebrew sources, Isaiah began to prophesy immediately after the commotion of the days of Uzziah, even on the same day. And if you want to check that, I've cut and pasted in the first chapter of Isaiah in our scriptures with the chapter heading and the first verse, where clearly it points to in the days of Uzziah. But it says right here, The people of Israel are apostate, rebellious, and corrupt. Only a few remain faithful. The people's sacrifices and feasts are rejected. This is just like in Amos with the idols, or their sacrifices being rejected. Same is the same message. They are called upon to repent and work righteousness. Zion will be redeemed in the day of restoration. So again, it's the same vision. Okay, there's no like secret mystery when it comes to Isaiah other than understanding he saw Jesus Christ in both advents, and we're going to talk about that he saw the plan of salvation as it is, and he's very plain about it when you see that all prophets are seeing and talking about the same thing. Here's verse 1 in chapter 1. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Those are the four kings that he is kind of court prophet to in his time in that kingdom of Judah. So he lives in the days of Uzziah, and his vision comes just as Velikovsky is suggesting here. He says, continuing on with Velikovsky in Isaiah, or his section titled Isaiah, the destruction in the land was very great. Here's a quote. I felt it coming. I felt the cough coming, so I stopped. Your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant, we should have been as Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah, end quote. The very horizon of Jerusalem was disfigured by the splitting of the mountain on the west, and the cities were filled with debris and mutilated bodies. In chapter 5, verse 25, he quotes, the hills did tremble, and carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. This was the event that kindled in Isaiah the prophetic spirit. During his long life, he prophesied in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. He did not cease to foretell the return of catastrophes. Isaiah was skilled in the observation of the stars, and he apparently knew that at periodic intervals, every 15 years, a catastrophe occurred caused, he believed, by the messenger of God. And here's a quote he says to support that idea. He says, his anger is not turned away, but his hand or sign is stretched out still, and he will lift up an ensign to the nations from afar. Isaiah drew an apocalyptic picture of swiftly moving hostile troops. Hey, this sounds like Joel, right? He was prophesying a cruel and mighty people of warriors, or a host of missiles hurled from afar. When it says, was he prophesying a cruel and mighty people of warriors, or a host of missiles hurled from afar when he spoke of the army that would come swiftly at the end of the world, called by the Lord? He says, their horses' hooves would be like flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind. If one look unto the land, behold darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened in the heavens thereof. Chapter 5, verse 30. It is not the Assyrians on horses and in chariots that are compared to the flint and the whirlwind, but the flint and the whirlwind that are likened to warriors. The darkness at the end of the picture discloses that which is the object of comparison, and that which is... Let me start that up. The darkness at the end of the picture discloses that which is the object of comparison and that to which it is compared. The catastrophe of the days of Uzziah was only a prelude. The day of wrath will return and will destroy the population, quote, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant. Chapter 6, verse 11. Again, quote, enter into the rock and hide thee into the dust, end quote. Chapter 2, verse 10. All over the world, caves in the rocks were regarded as the best places of refuge. Quote, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Chapter 2, verse 19. Isaiah appeared before King Ahaz and offered him a sign on the earth or in the height above. Ahaz refused, and he said, quote, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord, end quote. Chapter 7, verse 12. Then Isaiah faced the people, and he said, quote, and they shall look unto the earth and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, end quote. Chapter 8, verse 22. Nevertheless, he said, the dimness will not be as great as on two former occasions, when, quote, at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations, end quote. Chapter 9, verse 1. So he's talking about how Isaiah is referencing previous cosmic catastrophes where the hand and judgment and sign of the Lord, the sword of the Lord, comes down from heaven and disfigures and changes the land. He calculated, this is Velikovsky again, that the next catastrophe would cause less harm than had been caused on previous occasions. But soon thereafter, he changed his prognostication and became utterly pessimistic. So, just like the prophets, this is me now, just like the prophets before and after him, Isaiah's writings are full of cosmic and catastrophic language. He's the big picture prophet of God's covenant with Israel. He laments her wickedness. He foretells the scattering of Israel and the catastrophe and conquest and destruction of Jerusalem. He sees the Savior's mortal birth and the church and the ministry at his first advent. He sees the Book of Mormon come forward, whispering from the dust. And I've got a quote for that here. It's references Isaiah 29:4. And thou shalt be brought down, and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. This is the Book of Mormon. This is referenced by our prophets as being Isaiah directly seeing and referencing the Book of Mormon. And he also saw the gathering of Israel globally. He compares the destruction of Jerusalem to the Lord's second coming in power at the millennium, our day. He also prophesied of Christ as both the suffering servant in a corrupt vineyard and also as the King of glory of the forever kingdom of righteousness through the gathering of Israel in the end. When Isaiah receives his prophetic call from the Lord on the day of the commotion and catastrophe of Uzziah, he sees the throne of God in vision, which we've described already as part of the one vision and establishment of the millennial cosmic order. This is the transfiguration of the earth, with the Lord standing upon it on his throne, a heap of planets. Here's a picture I have of it depicted of both, the Alpha and the Omega. This would be the earth perspective looking up, and then this is the perspective, of the Lord sitting on the throne looking down at the earth as the footstool. So just a reminder of the cosmic throne where the earth is the footstool. This is being seen by Isaiah during a planetary encounter year, the commotion of Uzziah. Here's chapter 6 of Isaiah, chapter heading and verses 1 through 4. Isaiah sees the Lord. His sins are forgiven. He is called to prophesy. He prophesies of the Jews' rejection of Christ's teachings. A remnant will return. Compare to 2 Nephi chapter 16. Verse 1. In the year that the king Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Here. And his train would be the thing the thing dragging behind it. It connects. It's the plumb line that hits down, the Shekinah, the light that comes down to the temple. And if it's covering the earth, then the whole fixture is the temple, right? And his light comes down to it to light it up. So this is the new millennial sun lighting our 1,000 years of paradise. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. The phrase, his train filled the temple, brings me to a vision of the ethereal Shekinah and the connection of light and the presence of the Lord from the heavenly body to the temple, or tabernacle of the wilderness. Now, when I hear train, I imagine the pillar of fire and glory that trails his pavilion. And I have a picture here of these images kind of in sequence. So here's the pillar of fire as depicted by, looks like an AI rendering. Here's a comet with a train, or its hair, or its mane, or the pillar, right, going sideways. Here's actual plasma ball, where you'd see the same hair, or line, or pillar, or plumb line, or tree, or everything coming up. And here you have the Saturnian, this is the Wall Thornhill version of the Saturn polar column, the Alpha and the Omega sign, with this being the train coming down, this plasma road, or this ice road is how you would see it in that language. And then here's the Philo-Dibble drawing, where you have the train would be the glory covering the earth is this ethereal, like it looks like water, where you have these bridges between them, because it's going to be endowed in plasma, like covered in oil is the spirit. It's light, that idea. Okay, how do I get out of here? The fact that it is a fiery coal, like a comet or a barad, as we've talked in the Exodus, a hot or hailstone of Passover, that is brought to touch Isaiah's lips to purify him also fits with the planetary Passover theme of the throne vision. That it's this planet and Passover, this fiery coal of heaven that cleans the earth during catastrophe and judgment. So here are some depictions of Isaiah receiving his prophetic call and being cleansed and purified of his sins with a coal from an angel from heaven, from this checking out this glory, this throne, being put in his mouth. He's to see these things, to speak these things. He's purified for it. These throne visions, all of them, whether it's Isaiah or Ezekiel or whoever, they point to the millennial temple, body, throne, or congregation of worlds that Christ will rule and reign over in righteousness. Note, here's a baseline understanding of Isaiah that, it should include real-time exploring of these 10 keys from Elder Bruce R. McConkie, in my opinion. Here they are enumerated, but dive into them or to the article that I have linked here and learn more. And if you just click this, it'll open you up to the church website, where it's a talk that Bruce, or an Ensign article or something that Bruce R. McConkie gave when he was an apostle about the 10 keys to understanding Isaiah. Okay, so this is just kind of a baseline that this should be a given, but I'm just stating it here because the cosmic layer and application is an addition. It's a supplement to understanding these basic things about Isaiah first. Now, number 1, gain an overall knowledge of the plan of salvation and of God's dealings with his earthly children. And if they're all seeing this one vision of the plan of salvation, that makes sense. That's why you would have to understand it first before you start to talk about visions of it. Number 2, learn the position and destiny of the house of Israel in the Lord's eternal scheme of things. We've been seeing that very clearly in our chronological scrub, where you had Enoch being taken up and achieving Zion with his society and kingdom and his people, and Melchizedek doing the same with Salem before or after the flood, and then Abraham seeking that same destiny, but the covenant being that through his seed, all the earth would eventually be wrapped up and harvested to a Zion ascension at the end times when Christ would come. And the house of Israel is, through Abraham, that covenant that was passed down is the iteration or the version of God's Zion now in season, ready to be harvested. It's been spread apart and scattered all over the world to affect the Gentiles and all nations of all people, all 4 quarters of the earth. The house of Israel has been scattered amongst them, so that as they're called by the Lord in these latter days to recognize his gospel and to follow him and to get to his temple and to make the same covenants that were made, as we read in these scriptures, with the Lord of hosts before catastrophe, that they would be a light to the Gentiles and that they would be a blessing and a benefit to them. And this is us. This is those who easily recognize the gospel in these latter days are those of the blood of Israel, those of the Lord's people sent to prepare the earth for the second coming. And so we are a small percentage, as Nephi saw in the vision of us, that the people of the Lord were very small people on the church, on the earth, because of the corruption and the deception going on. But that this is the destiny and position of the house of Israel in the eternal scheme of things, that we were the seedbed for the Lord when he himself would come to restore the earth to the paradise that Adam had lost, that Israel would be his vineyardmen, his servants at the time of his reckoning. Number 3, know the chief doctrines about which Isaiah chose to write. And those would be, I would say, the doctrines of Christ, our eternal motor of spiritual gifts that we talk about constantly here in our framework, right? Faith in Jesus Christ, repentance, baptism by immersion, the gift of the Holy Ghost, and using the Holy Ghost to amplify, enhance our talents, and give and serve and use the priesthood to effect good and the conversion of hearts in others. So a lot of these are the chief doctrines when it comes to the weightier measures of the law, like we talked about with mercy and justice and righteousness. They're all wrapped into these things because they're so foundational to the plan of salvation. All right. Number 4, use the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is like an Isaiah explained book, essentially. It shows it helps us to interpret Isaiah better than the Gentile world has, because of how Nephi and Jacob and all these prophets who revered him, even up to Moroni at the very end, and Christ himself when he comes is like, study Isaiah. He's got the word, right? Like the Book of Mormon shows us how we can treat Isaiah with the respect and the position it deserves in terms of what he revealed and described, which was the whole plan of salvation, this whole scattering and gathering of Israel, and why the conditions of the world are in such that they are today. 5, use latter-day revelation, right? Any modern-day prophets, what they've said about Isaiah, their commentary on it, that's stuff you should seek out and really incorporate and synthesize to your understanding of Isaiah. Number 6, learn how the New Testament interprets Isaiah, right? He's the most quoted prophet of the New Testament, and so that's important. And so see how he's used in context in that. he provides in this article lots of good quotes and resources. So if you need a baseline to study, start with this article and go and chase down every footnote. Number 7, study Isaiah in its Old Testament context. This is what we're doing right now, okay? So we are achieving this by looking at the situation. And you can see how consistent it is from Elijah and Elisha to Joel to Amos to now Isaiah, picking up right where Amos left off. Now, learn the manner of prophesying used among the Jews in Isaiah's day. I would argue that cosmism and this planetary awareness is part of the manner of prophesying, in that they are literally talking about catastrophe coming from these heavenly bodies, especially the heavenly body that was so revered that had delivered them from Egypt in the beginning. Okay? So to me, the manner of prophesying is a manner using symbolism to represent different layers of gospel application, from the cosmic to the earthly to the underworldly. All of it are different layers that can be woven together through accurate symbolism. That's what I believe the manner of the prophesying amongst the Jews is that a corruption of symbolism and planetary worship and idolatry and things is what corrupts understanding prophecy. That's why John, when in his revelation, he's using all of these cosmic symbols that all of the Gentile nations, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Phoenicians, all of them, the Persians, they would all recognize the symbols John used in his revelation in talking about the coming and revelation or revealing of Christ as the Son of God, as the King of the planets and the one who orders and governs them, right? This is what the rest of the world was worshiping. And this is what wraps it together using these correct symbols that associate what God is, what Jesus Christ is, and how he has been manifested throughout time up until John's point in time. And it was written for us because we're going to see the same things, yet we're ignorant of their application because we don't study these prophets in their context. We don't understand the manner of prophesying amongst them because it's in that context. And if we don't have a foundation in cosmism to tie most of the language they're using that we're seeing is catastrophic to their proper agents, being, a cosmic body in the earth or whatever, like these planetary electrical discharges and things, we can misinterpret things or overinterpret things to the spiritual or, and vice versa. So it's necessary for a balance. Now, number 9, have the spirit of prophecy. This is something I would encourage you to pray for. As I have studied these things myself, as I have sought to share them with others, as I have sought to understand Isaiah myself, I specifically ask in my prayers for the gift of and spirit of prophecy. So it's something you should seek. It's something you should have and understand. And to my view, my simplified view, it's seeing everything through a lens of Christ. It's what we're doing. It's that Christ is the plan. He's the same before, today, and forever. And so understanding things in this broad macroscape, in my mind, is the beginning of starting to understand how to use the gift and spirit of prophecy. Number 10, devote yourself to hard, conscientious study. Well, I don't think anybody who's made it this far to be listening to me and engaged with what I'm saying, I don't think it's hard for you to understand how important this is. There are many people that I love very dearly who have no idea I even know or study or understand these things because they're unwilling to look at what I'm doing. They're unwilling to devote themselves to a little bit of hard, conscientious study about these principles that we all profess to believe in terms of the Old Testament, the New Testament, these prophets. Everybody says that Isaiah is so important. Oh, yeah, we got to study Isaiah. He's so important. We want to brag about how we know about Isaiah. But how many people do you know are talking about Isaiah in his context like this? I don't find many of them. That's why I have dedicated myself to hard, conscientious study and, to dig out these things to better understand him. Now, our cosmic layer opens up the symbolism and prophecies of Isaiah even further. To add to number 4, which is use the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is the world's greatest commentary on the book of Isaiah. And I've got this cool graphic I made with all this kind of mashed up. I think it's cool. You can't understand the messianic prophet, and that just means the prophet, witnessing of the Messiah. He's spoke as the Messiah, and a lot of times he's speaking messianically, is what we describe it in like institute manuals and stuff like that. He's speaking as if Christ were speaking, and he's the prophet Christ pointed to understand what is about to befall us and happen and how it'll all wrap up, that he understood it clearly. So you can't understand the messianic prophet, the big picture master, without knowing, like the Nephite prophets knew, Nephi and Jacob and all the others, that Jesus is the Christ and would redeem all and Israel at a future time. They saw Christ in a manger at his first advent, and they saw the resurrected King of glory and our day at the second coming. Like Isaiah, they were not confused like the Jews who were around at the advent, who did not recognize Christ in a manger, who did not have the vision, the ability to see what was before them. Now, not all. Obviously, there was a small percentage of his disciples who were faithful and even died following him and knowing and recognizing that he was the Son of God, right? They recognized the Christ of Isaiah. They recognized the Christ of Nephi, of the Book of Mormon prophets. But here in 2 Nephi 11, 2-3, and now I, Nephi, write more of the words of Isaiah, for my soul delighteth in his words, for I will liken his words unto my people, and I will send them forth unto all my children, for he verily saw my Redeemer, even as I have seen him. And we know in his vision that he gives to us of seeing Christ, that he saw him born to a virgin in a manger, and they saw him crucified by his very own people, and they saw him resurrected, and they saw him come again later. So they knew the timeline. They knew the different advents. And Isaiah knew this. 3, and my brother Jacob has also seen him, Christ, as I have seen him. Wherefore I will send their words forth unto my children to prove unto them that my words are true. Wherefore, by the words of 3, God hath said, I will establish my word. Nevertheless, God sendeth more witnesses, and he proveth all his words. For verily, he verily saw my Redeemer, even as I have seen him. This is why the Book of Mormon is the greatest commentary on Isaiah, because they illuminate how we should interpret, how we should see. What is Isaiah talking about when he's talking about the suffering servant versus the king of righteousness, and that it is applying to two different eras and times and dispensations. The remnant exodus of Lehi to America, they knew that they were a scattered branch of Israel. They were less than a century removed from Isaiah's time, and they rejoiced in Isaiah's prophecies pertaining to their experience being scattered, and their hope and the future visitation of Christ and ultimate gathering in the end times. They knew of God's covenants. The restoration through the Book of Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints properly places covenants back at the center of our worship of the Lord. Those of Israel who remained in Palestine through the various political captivities after Isaiah and Lehi, so that would be the ones of Daniel's vision, Babylon, Persia, Greek, the Roman captivity, they did not recognize the Messiah when he was born amongst them, perhaps because they were expecting a deliverer who was all of the archetypes prophesied by the prophets all at once. And they were hyper-focused on the legal and political or other aspects of a surface-level understanding of the prophecies and law of Moses, which pointed to Christ. Perhaps even this cosmic layer aspect was something that blinded them to their Redeemer in the flesh. They had lost their covenant understanding of their deliverance. On the other hand, the Book of Mormon prophets like Nephi and Jacob, who escaped the Babylonian captivity circa 600 BC, knew that far in the future the Son of God, Jesus, would be born to a virgin in Bethlehem and suffer and bleed and die for sins of the world after establishing his church upon 12 apostles. They knew that those apostles would preach to the Gentiles and give the opportunity to all the world to enter into sacred covenants with Christ. They knew and saw in dream and vision, and by the power of the Holy Ghost, that Christ would visit their descendants as the resurrected Savior, and that later he would return a second time as the King of heaven in glory to fulfill all righteousness after the Gentiles had been given an opportunity to follow. This is why their commentary is so valuable. It clarifies and unlocks Isaiah because they saw the same things. Here's a picture of Christ when he appeared to America after his resurrection, 3 Nephi chapter 11. Now let's point our attention once again to the catastrophe electric layer of Isaiah, continuing with Velikovsky. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as a fuel of the fire. Chapter 9, verse 19. His rod will lift up the sea after the manner of Egypt, as on the day of crossing of the Red Sea. Chapter 10, verse 26. And the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand, sign, over the river, and shall smite it in the 7 streams. Chapter 11, verse 15. Nor will Palestine be spared. He shall shake his hand, sign, against the hill of Jerusalem, just as he did before David. Thus, this is Velikovsky. He was just quoting a lot of Isaiah there. So here's Velikovsky. Thus, a war of the heavenly host, commanded by the Lord, was proclaimed against the nations of the earth. And the nations of the earth were aroused by the expectation of doomsday, apocalypse. The noise of the multitude in the mountains, quote, like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nation gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. Chapter 13, verse 4. This multitude comes, quote, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole land, end quote. Chapter 13, verse 5. The world will be darkened. Quote, the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in its going forth in the forenoon, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine, end quote. Chapter 13, verse 10. The world will be thrown off its axis. The heavenly host will shake the heavens of the earth and shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger, end quote. Chapter 13, verse 13. The nations shall flee afar off, quote. They shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind, end quote. And note how that goes back to the threshing floor and that cosmic catastrophe there. He's tying it to something that would be intimately remembered as a destruction from heaven threatening them, right? And, oh man, it's okay. Look how I've highlighted these sections that we're talking about. Velikovsky's identifying the signs that Isaiah is talking about when he's talking about doomsday. He's saying the world will be darkened. The world will be thrown off its axis, wobbling to and fro as a drunkard, right? The nations shall flee afar off and be chased. So he's going over these signs, and he's giving quotes from Isaiah to back up, like, this is what Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah, on his vigils, watched the firmament, and in, quote, appointed times, end quote, expected, quote, from the north a smoke, end quote. Chapter 14, verse 31. Just as Elijah and just as David and all of them looked to the northwest for this smoke and storm and passing body, right? This is what he's looking for. He quotes again. All ye inhabitants of the world, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth a trumpet, hear ye, end quote. Chapter 18, verse 3. The eyes of all, quote, dwellers of the earth, end quote, were directed toward the sky, and they listened to the bowels of the earth. So he's talking about this electrical dialogue again, that when an ensign on the mountains, this is what we're talking about, this, like Mount Sinai, like a cosmic body coming down and interacting with the tops of the mountains first, and noises being heard like the blowing of a trumpet or the groaning of the earth during earthquakes, right? This is what he's talking about. He's bringing in the catastrophic language. He says, inquiries were sent to Jerusalem from Seir in Arabia. Quote, watchman, what of the night? End quote. From his watchtower, prepare the table, watch in the watchtower. Isaiah gave his forecasts to inquirers. Nervous tension grew with the approach of the, quote, appointed time, end quote. And a rumor sufficed to drive the population of the cities to the housetops, end quote. And now he quotes, what aileth thee now, that thou art wholly gone up to the housetops, question mark, end quote. That's chapter 22, verse 1. So again, like in the days of Uzziah before the earthquake and the prophesied destruction by these prophets and an obviously visible something coming from the heavens, these people scattered to the mountains and the caves for safety. And here in Isaiah's day, maybe a lesser version of it, they're going up to the housetops, the tops of the roofs. In preparation for something. Much of the city of David was damaged, and many structures had fissures, cracks from almost continuous earth tremors. Chapter 22, verse 9. The seer frightened the population with his constant warnings of, quote, a day of trouble and of perplexity by the Lord God of hosts, end quote. With, quote, breaking down the walls and of crying to the mountains, end quote. That's chapter 22, verse 5. But many among the population took the attitude of those who before doomsday say, quote, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die, end quote. Chapter 22, verse 13. Now he goes back, appealing to other witnesses, prophets here. He says, Joel, who prophesied at the same time, also spoke of, quote, forgive me, wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. End quote. Joel 2, 30-31. Micah, another seer, in the days of Jotham, quote, Ahaz and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, end quote, warned that the day was close when, quote, the mountains shall be molten and the valleys shall be cleft as wax before the fire, end quote. That's from Micah 1:4. quote, marvelous things, quote, will be shown, as in the days when Israel left Egypt. Quote, the nations shall see and be confounded at all their might. Their ears shall be deaf, and they shall move out of their holes like worms of the earth, end quote. That's Micah 7:15 through 17. So Joel, Micah, and Amos, they warned in similar terms of a day of thick darkness and a day and the day dark with night. Astronomers who thought that all of this refers to a common eclipse of the sun wondered, from 763 BC down to the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC, no total eclipse of the sun was visible in Palestine. That's what they say. So they wondered, they're like, that's interesting. Why were they always talking about that if there wasn't ever an eclipse during those times? Well, they took it for granted that the earth revolves along exactly the same orbit and on a slowly rotating axis, and so they questioned, why did the prophets speak of eclipses when there were none? However, other descriptions of the world catastrophe in these prophets do not accord with the effects of an ordinary eclipse either. And here I have a little interjection myself before we continue with Velikovsky. I say, I'm quoting him when he's quoting, I think it's Joel here or Isaiah. He shall shake his hand, sign, against the hill of Jerusalem. And I think I already mentioned it. This is entirely reminiscent of David's encounter with the sword-drawn angel of the Lord at the threshing floor of judgment upon the same hill of Jerusalem. It's the same language because he's recalling and predicting the same threat to apostate Israel in desperate need of repentance. Velikovsky continues to identify the same language in Isaiah's prophecies that map onto planetary encounter. So what does he point out? Hosts and noise from the ends of heaven. The world is darkened. The world is thrown off its axis. The nations flee and fall into chaos. Smoke from the north, as like Elijah watching the sea. The sun darkened, earthquakes or earth shocks. Continuing with Velikovsky. The word shaog, S-H-A-O-G, used by Amos and Joel, is explained by the Talmud as an earth shock. So different than an earthquake. And let's see how. The field of action in which is the entire world, whereas a regular earthquake is of local character. Such a shaking of the earth, disturbed in its rotation, is visualized also as a shaking of the sky, an expression found in the prophets, in Babylonian texts, and in other literary sources. So there's the difference. Earthquake is a local earthquake you don't expect. An earth shock is what they were running from, something that affects the whole earth and shakes the sky, and is described that way, just as Isaiah says, the earth will rise to shake the earth terribly. Then the prophecy was fulfilled. Amid the catastrophe, Isaiah raised his voice. Fear and the pit and the snare, pitch are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth. For the windows from on high are open and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. So there it's happening. He's not just prognosticating at the second coming at some future date. They were living through the catastrophe. Just like in the days of the Exodus, pitch and oil and fire and all kinds of things came down as the two planets had an encounter, or two objects had an encounter. The catastrophe came on the day which King Ahaz was buried. There was a commotion. The terrestrial axis shifted or was tilted, and the sunset was hastened by several hours. This cosmic disturbance is described in the Talmud, in the Midrashim, and referred to by the fathers of the church. It is related also in the records and told in the traditions of many people. It appears that a heavenly body passed very close to the earth, moving, as it seems, in the same direction as the earth on its nocturnal side. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down. The inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. Isaiah 24, 1 and 6. He concludes this section by declaring that the catastrophe Isaiah warned about initially happened on the day in which King Ahaz was buried. So he, Isaiah, started prophesying on the day of the catastrophe of Uzziah, and then the next catastrophe he mentioned happens as Ahaz dies, right? So there's these transitionings here. There's a 15-year gap there between the catastrophes and the deaths of these kings. Here's a chart below from the church website that takes a glance at, again, at the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel and of Assyria, so they're the threatening nation, that Isaiah is contemporary with and mentioning. Now, I have a note here. Keep in mind that the 10 northern tribes are taken captive by the Assyrian kings Shalmaneser V and Sargon II around 722 to 721 BC. This is the first major scatter event of Israel after their own schism and division into two separate kingdoms after Solomon. So here you have the kings of Assyria And the timeline, so starting at 745 BC and then going forward in history to 681, where you have Sennacherib and Manasseh. And Manasseh is the one who's rumored or slated, accused, or what's the word? Alleged to have martyred or murdered Isaiah. We'll get to that. So here you have all of these Assyrian kings. Then you have the kings of Israel at this time. So you have Menahem, Pekahiah, Pekah, and Hoshea. These are names you should recognize if you've read Isaiah a bunch. Pekah, Pekahiah, these things. He's talking to what's going on contemporary with his time amongst these kingdoms, their wickedness. And it's the same types of warnings that we've just read about with Joel and Amos and Elijah going to Ahab and all these other kings. It's very similar, making unscrupulous treaties with our enemies, breaking the covenant behind the back, doing secret combinations, all of these things, secret conspiracy and murder. All of it is what Isaiah is condemning amongst the kings of the chosen people, Israel, but also amongst the neighboring nations and kings like Assyria. So, and Isaiah and many other prophets, they level, plenty of warnings at Assyria and Babylon and Persia and all of the kingdoms as well. It's just consistent. Just as there are warnings levied against the Gentiles of our day all throughout the Book of Mormon and from our modern prophets today, warning the world. Like, look at the family proclamation. There are direct warnings to the nations of the world there. It would be the same thing as if hearing Isaiah talk about the kings of Assyria and Sennacherib and warning him about the dangers of abortion or whatever it might be, right? Destroying the family unit. And the consequences from heaven, the catastrophe spoken of by these old prophet testaments would be brought down upon the same nations in the same manner, in the same way, because it's the same thing, right? It's beautiful. Isaiah forecasted these same types of cyclical planetary catastrophes in the future, leading to the last grand encounter at the second coming of the Messiah and the changing of the earth to her millennial state as the new heaven and the new earth. What scripture reference did I put there? Isaiah 65:17. For, behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come to mind. That's planetary rearrangement, folks. That's planetary transfiguration. That's a new heaven and a new earth, the stars changing, the earth moving position. Catastrophe. The flames of Sennacherib and the sundial. So there's a planetary encounter in the days of Uzziah. There's another with Ahaz, and again in the 14th year of the reign of Hezekiah. So there we have catastrophes 14 years apart with Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah. So let's look up here. You have Uzziah here going to Ahaz and then to Hezekiah, right? Or sometime in here, there's another catastrophe involving Hezekiah. So yeah, boom, boom, boom. Let me reread that. So there's a planetary encounter in the days of Uzziah. There's another with Ahaz. Then again in the 14th year of the reign of Hezekiah, when the Assyrian, Sennacherib, invaded Judah in the south, right? So this is him threatening down into the southern kingdoms after they had already scattered and taken, they in the process? Yeah, they had already taken with Shalmaneser and Sargon II here. This is when the northern tribes are taken. That's where the kings stop right here. Boom. But in these days after here, you have the Assyrians then threatening into the southern kingdom of Judah and the kingdoms of Judah. So this is why he's court prophet to these kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. UPS delivery, we're good. All right, so let's see here. What was I saying? Isaiah, court prophet to Hezekiah, disaster. Oh, Sennacherib is coming down to threaten these southern kingdoms. He's pushed down into the southern kingdoms of Judah on the map. Okay, but before we get there, let's take a look at what Hezekiah does as he ascends to the throne after the death of his father Ahaz and the catastrophe. So right here, Ahaz dies, and then Hezekiah ascends to the throne. So we're talking about 715 BC. What happens? 2 Kings chapter 18. Hezekiah reigns in righteousness in Judah. Oh. He destroys idolatry and breaks the brazen serpent made by Moses because the children of Israel burn incense to it. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, invades Judah in a blasphemous speech. Rabshakeh asks Jerusalem to surrender to the Assyrians. Let's read verses 1 through 7. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel. So let's look up here. I just want to see this. Here's Hoshea, okay. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, let's see, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. So while Hoshea is the king, Hezekiah apparently is standing up to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. This is good. It's a reprieve. He removed the high places. So those would be what? Bethel and Dan, where you had Jeroboam set up the false bull idols, right? The calves. And break the images and cut down the groves. And these links, I'm sure, go to those. Explore those and check me on that. But it's exactly what he's talking about. And he cut down the groves. These would be the groves to Asherah. So you have the Baal worship and the Asherah worship all being removed by Hezekiah. And break in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense unto it. So instead of it being a symbol of the cosmic reality and catastrophe and deliverance that was given to them, and looking forward to Christ, they began to distort it and not understand it and burn incense to it. And he called it Nehushtan. 5. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. 6. For he clave to the Lord and departed not from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. So he went back to the law. Verse 7. And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not. Wow, what a breath of fresh air it seems like Hezekiah is in everything we've been studying. He was another champion against Israel's descent into planetary idolatry. When Sennacherib rose up against him and threatened Jerusalem, what did he do? He prayed, he repented, he went to the temple, and he sought the guidance of the prophet Isaiah. 2 Kings 19, Hezekiah seeks counsel from Isaiah to save Jerusalem. Isaiah prophesies the defeat of the Assyrians and the death of Sennacherib. Hezekiah prays for deliverance. Sennacherib sends a blasphemous letter. Then Isaiah prophesies that the Assyrians will be destroyed and that a remnant of Judah will flourish. An angel slays 185,000 Assyrians. Sennacherib is slain by his sons. Wow. Okay, so here you have Hezekiah turning to the Lord as Assyrians, Sennacherib and his army are encroaching upon the southern kingdom of Judah. And what does Hezekiah do? But he gets reinforcements from the Lord, and boy, does the Lord come through in prophecy and in fulfillment of that prophecy with protection of his people by an angel. We'll get to it. And also the slaying of Sennacherib by his own kin. Verses 1 and 2 of 2 Kings 19 read, And it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes, and he covered him, he heard it being that the Assyrians were coming, that he rent his clothes, and he covered himself with sackcloth, and he went into the house of the Lord. And he sent unto Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So he's like, go get Isaiah. So he's true in his repentance and seeking Isaiah. And here's what Isaiah prophesies. In Isaiah 37, So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. And Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say unto your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. Boom. Answer to Hezekiah's prayers directly from the prophet. Mediation and intervention, not only from, or an intervention from God, just as before, cosmic fire coming down from heaven like in Elijah's day to destroy an army. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, he says. In 2 Kings 19, here we have it. And I have a little image of this. Verses 35 through 37, 2 Kings 19. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer his sons smote him with the sword. And they escaped into the land of Armenia. And Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. So there it comes to pass, just as Isaiah had prophesied. But let's focus on this angel who comes out and smites the Assyrians with a blast. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers are killed by this debated blast. Velikovsky puts forward compelling evidence that this was a catastrophic fire from heaven event during, you guessed it, a planetary encounter with Mars. Let's read again Isaiah section in Worlds in Collision. Time passed after the death of Ahaz, and the 14th year of the king Hezekiah approached. Again, the frightened world anxiously anticipated a catastrophe. On its two previous approaches, the celestial missile had come very close indeed. This time, the end of the world was feared. After the cataclysms of the days of Uzziah and of the funeral day of Ahaz, one did not have to be a prophet to foretell a new cosmic catastrophe. The earth will move out of its place, a scorching flame will devour the air, hot stones will fall from the sky, and the waters of the sea will mount and descend upon the continents. Quote, Behold, the Lord hath a mighty and strong one, which as a tempest, cataract, of hail, and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall cast down to the earth with the hand. End quote. Isaiah 28:2. Quote, the mighty and strong one, quote, was a heavenly body, a missile of the Lord. Once more, it was destined to scourge the earth. Quote, the overflowing scourge shall pass through, end quote. Chapter 28, verse 18. Was Isaiah's new prognostication. He's saying that this scourge is going to pass through, overflowing. Although the people of Jerusalem hoped that, quote, when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, end quote. That was in 28:15. Jerusalem had no covenant with death. There will be no safe place of refuge. Quote, the waters shall overflow. The waters shall overflow the hiding place, end quote. Chapter 28, verse 17. Quote, a consumption even determined upon the whole earth, end quote. 28:22. Quote, for the Lord shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his strange work, and bring to pass his act, his strange act. Chapter 28, verse 21. Now, what was this strange act, Velikovsky asks, in the valley of Gibeon? Well, in that valley, the host of Joshua witnessed a rain of bolides and saw the sun and moon disturbed in their movement across the firmament. We saw this already. Quote, at an instant suddenly, end quote, the land will be invaded with, quote, small dust, end quote, and with, quote, the multitude of terrible ones, end quote. Hey, we talked about them. And it will be visited with, quote, thunder, with earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire, end quote. That's chapter 29, verses 5 and 6. He says, a devouring fire, quote, and an overflowing stream, quote, shall sift the nations, all these are quotes, with tempest and hailstones. The prophet, reading the signs of the sky, took upon himself the role of sentinel of the universe, and from his watchtower in Jerusalem he spread the alarm. Let the earth hear, for the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. Chapter 34, verse 1. Then follows the desolate picture of the earth, or the destroyed earth and dissolved sky. Chapter 34, verse 4, it reads, and all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their host shall fall down, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven, and the streams shall be turned into pitch, and the dust into brimstone, and the land shall become burning pitch, and shall not be quenched night nor day, the smoke shall go up forever. Isaiah referred his readers to the book of the Lord. Seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, no one of these shall fail. Now, he says this book probably belonged to the same series of the book of Jasher, in which the records of the days of Joshua at Gibeon were preserved. Old traditions and astronomical observations must have been written down in the book of the Lord, no longer extant. This is for LDS readers, like, not a surprise that there are no longer extant books referenced in the Bible, whereas you have a lot of Protestant Christians that just believe, like, anything in or not in the Bible or blah, blah, blah is just verboten. They're confused as to what the Bible is. Now, Velikovsky identifies the mighty and strong one as a heavenly body, a missile of the Lord. He also associates the phrases of strange work and strange act of God with these planetary judgments. A cosmic manifestation, strange indeed, rare and mind bending. There you go, rare and mind bending. That's the same language the Lord uses to describe his second coming in power and glory, when he comes out of his hiding place to vex the nations. That language is from what? I have the link here in Doctrine and Covenants, section 101. Let's read it. Section 101, verses 89 through 90, 95. 89. And if the president heed them not, this is when it says, like, when the church shall have grievances against the government because we become a captured people. So this would, imagine if it's talking about Babylon, it's talking about Persia, Greek, the Romans. This is the Americans. So if the president of America heed them not, then will the Lord arise and come forth out of his hiding place, and in his fury vex the nation. And in his hot displeasure, and in his fierce anger, in his time will cut off those wicked, unfaithful, and unjust stewards, and appoint them their portion among the hypocrites and unbelievers, that I may proceed to bring to pass my act, my strange act, and perform my work, my strange work, that men may discern between the righteous and the wicked, saith your God. For the preparation wherewith I design to prepare mine apostles to prune my vineyard for the last time, that I may bring to pass my strange act, that I may pour out my spirit upon all flesh. So I believe these scriptures are a direct reference to cosmic catastrophe, the strange act being planetary visitation, Passover, to vex the nations. This is when God comes out of his hiding place and his pavilion passes over and connects to the righteous, just as it did for Moses and Israel, to lead them to deliverance, or lead them in deliverance out of captive Egypt. Let's take in Velikovsky's summarizing and commentary on the blast. So he titles it Ignis e Coelo. The destruction of the army of Sennacherib is described laconically in the Book of Kings. I mean, remember, laconically means like tersely, brusque, not complete. And he quotes and he says, "And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out," we read this, "and smote the camp of the Assyrians 180,500. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, and he went and returned and dwelt in Nineveh. It is similarly described in the book of Chronicles, where it reads, "And the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, prayed and cried to heaven, and the Lord sent an angel which cut off all the mighty men of valor, and leaders and captains in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he, Sennacherib, returned with shame of his face to his own land." So yeah, it's told a couple different ways. I like this way in the Chronicles because it shows Isaiah acting like an Elijah, commanding the burst to come down. Not so much that the angel just does it, but that there's an element of order and command. Now, what kind of destruction was this, Velikovsky asks? He quotes Malach, M-A-L-A-C-H, translated as angel, means in Hebrew, one who is sent to execute an order, supposed to be an order of the Lord. It is explained in the texts of the books of Kings and Isaiah that it was a blast sent upon the army of Sennacherib. I will send a blast upon him, and he shall return to his own land. This was the prophecy immediately preceding the catastrophe. The simultaneous death of tens of thousands of warriors could not be due to plague, as it is usually supposed, because a plague does not so strike so suddenly. I think that's what Josephus and others, they when their commentary on this blast of Sennacherib, they say it was like the bubonic plague, and that rats had come and chewed through the bowstrings of all the warriors, and so they couldn't fight. Or it's just some lackluster, like he says, laconic explanation of these things that doesn't take into account the witness of planetary catastrophe. So let me continue reading. He says, couldn't be due to plague, as it usually is supposed, because a plague does not strike so suddenly. It develops through contagion, if rapidly, in a few days, and it may infect a large camp, but it does not affect great multitudes without showing a curve of cases mounting from day to day. The Talmud and Midrash sources, which are numerous, all agree on the manner in which the Assyrian host was destroyed. They say, a blast fell from the sky on the camp of Sennacherib. It was not a flame, but a consuming blast. He quotes them. Their souls were burnt, though their garments remained intact, end quote. The phenomenon was accompanied by a terrific noise. He quotes, Arad Jibil, end quote, is the Babylonian designation of, quote, Ignis e Coelo, end quote, which means fire from the sky. So Arad Jibil is the Babylonian designation, and Ignis e Coelo, I believe, is Latin. Is what my guess. I don't know. But another version of the destruction of the army of Sennacherib is given by Herodotus. During his visit in Egypt, he heard from the Egyptian priests or guides to the antiquities that the army of Sennacherib, while threatening the borders of Egypt, was destroyed in a single night. And Egypt being Confederate, I think it close, they would consider the southern kingdom of Israel, on their borders, essentially. Now, according to this story, an image of a deity holding in his palm the figure of a mouse was erected in an Egyptian temple to commemorate the miraculous event. In explanation of the symbolic figure, Herodotus was told that myriads of mice descended upon the Assyrian camp and gnawed away the cords of their bows and other weapons, deprived them of their arms, and the troops fled in panic. Josephus Flavius repeated the version of Herodotus and added that there is another version by the Chaldeo-Hellenistic historian Berosus. Josephus wrote introductory words to a quotation of Berosus, but the quotation itself is missing in the present text of the Jewish Antiquities. Oh man, how convenient. This cosmism must have been erased from it, right? Obviously, it was an explanation different from that of Herodotus. Josephus's own account, somewhat rationalistic as usual, says a bubonic plague was the cause of sudden death of 185,000 warriors in the camp of the Assyrians before the walls of Jerusalem on the very first night of the siege. Herodotus recounts that he saw the statue of the god with the mouse and palm in his hand, which was erected in memory of the event. 2 cities of Egypt claimed the same sacred animal, the shrew mouse. Panopolis, Akhmim, in the south, and Letopolis in the north. Herodotus did not travel to the south of Egypt, thus he must have seen the statue of Letopolis. Even today, many bronze mice, sometimes inscribed with the prayers of pilgrims, are found in the ground of Letopolis. Both cities with the cult of the sacred mouse were sacred cities of thunderbolts and meteorites. So go figure, right? The Egyptian name of Letopolis is indicated by the same hieroglyphic as the thunderbolt. In a text dating from the New Kingdom and originating in Letopolis, it is said that a festival was established in the city in memory of, quote, the night of fire for the adversaries, end quote. This fire was like, quote, the flame before the wind to the end of heaven and the end of earth, end quote. I come forth and go in the devouring fire and the day of repelling the adversaries, says the text in the name of God. Thus the god with the sacred mouse was a god of devouring fire. However, interpreting the mouse as a symbol of bubonic plague, the commentators agreed with Josephus and that Sennacherib's army must have been destroyed by a plague. Lame, right? I just don't accept that. I don't. Velikovsky didn't accept it, and there's clear other consistent evidence to describe what happened here. So he mentions that the Talmud and Midrash sources agree that what fell from the sky was a consuming blast, accompanied by a terrible noise. It destroyed the bodies of the Assyrian soldiers, but left their garments intact. Velikovsky argues against the traditional interpretation that the blast was just a plague. Like we did with Elijah and the battle of the priests of Baal, let's zoom out on the storyline and note that a bigger picture about this blast emerges when we let the story play on just a little bit longer, as we did with Elijah. In the very next chapter, Isaiah 38, and it says, in those days, meaning in the same days that Sennacherib is turned away by the blast, we see that Hezekiah is deathly ill, and something cosmic occurs as a sign. They happen at the same time, the blast and the sun moving back. Isaiah 38. Here's the caption. Hezekiah's life is threatened, or lengthened 15 years. The sun goes back 10 degrees as a sign. Hezekiah praises and thanks the Lord. Verses 1-3. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came unto him, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. Then Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed unto the Lord. Think of the difference between him and Ahaziah and Elijah's sentence of his sickness and death. This is Ahaziah, that was the name. Now I remembered it, see? I told you I'd remember it. So then Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed unto the Lord. So instead of seeking out the gods of Ekbad or Baal, Beelzebub, he turned to the Lord. He turned to Isaiah and he turned to the Lord. And he said, Remember now, O Lord, I beseech thee, how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and I have done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. Velikovsky notices this, and he ties it all to the planetary encounter thesis. He says, It is peculiar that the numerous commentators of Herodotus and the no less numerous commentators of the Bible did not draw attention to a certain coincidence in these descriptions of the calamity. Hezekiah became gravely ill of some bubonic affection and was near death. Isaiah was called. He told the king that he would die, but soon he returned and offered a remedy, a lump of figs for the boil, and told the king that the Lord would deliver him from the immediate death and would also deliver this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria. And this shall be a sign unto thee from the Lord. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which is gone down in the sundial before a sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backwards. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. Velikovsky says, it continues, an optical illusion is the common explanation for the meaning of this passage. The sundial mentioned together with the name of Ahaz is supposed to have been a dial built by Ahaz, father of Hezekiah. But the Talmudic tradition explains that the day was shortened by 10 degrees on the day when Ahaz was buried, and the day was prolonged by 10 degrees when Hezekiah was ill and recovered. And this is the meaning of the shadow of the degrees which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, right? So it went down when Ahaz dies. Something happened. A catastrophe happened, as we said, every about 15 years. When Ahaz dies, there's a catastrophe happening. And the sundial went back. Something happened where the sun was prolonged in the sky a bit longer than it should have been. And then in the days of Hezekiah's sickness, it returns. It goes back 15 years later, 14 years later. Continuing with Velikovsky, the rabbinical sources state in a definitive manner that the disturbance in the movement of the sun happened on the evening of the destruction of Sennacherib's army by a devouring blast. So he's saying, they happened the same day, same time, same within 24 hours, right? That the sun stopped moving or its motion was changed. And then there was some type of fire coming down to consume them, an electric discharge, just as we saw with Elijah calling down fire from heaven. Now, returning to Herodotus, we shall give our attention to the following important fact neglected by the commentators. The famous paragraph of Herodotus, which records in the name of the Egyptian priests that since Egypt became a kingdom, the sun had repeatedly changed its direction, is inserted in no other place of Herodotus' history, but directly following the story of the destruction of Sennacherib's army. So he's saying there's this curious Egyptian admission that the sun changed directions in the sky a few times, repeatedly, and he says that right after this whole explanation and discussion about the blast of Sennacherib. So tradition, again, Talmud and Midrash, holds that 14 years prior, at the burial of Ahaz, the day was shortened by 10 degrees forward according to the sundial. Now, at the threat of Sennacherib, and as Hezekiah falls ill to some fatal plague, the Lord, through Isaiah, promises to give a prayerful and repentant Hezekiah 15 more years of life. And he does so with a sign that the day will be prolonged as the day the sundial will go down backwards. He does so with a sign that the day will be prolonged as the sundial will go backwards by 10 degrees. The sun-earth is disturbed in its orbit again. Like a course correction from the previous disturbance is how Velikovsky puts it. So he says, in the days Ahaz dies, the earth was tilted on its axis and moved. And then it was corrected the 10 degrees back on this day that Hezekiah repents and is healed for 15 more years. This description of the movement of the sun changing from an earthbound perspective is of the same nature as the planetary encounters witnessed that we have discussed during the Exodus and the passage and also in Joshua's day. But in those days, it was Venus as the heavenly protagonist to tilt and slow the rotation of the earth. Now it was Mars and his steeds, the terrible ones. Here's a beautiful graphic that I made and I'm proud of. So let's open it up. And here you have the earth. And I just kind of overlaid a bunch of pictures so you can see like the magnetic nature of it, that it's got, an electrical buffer. And I have the quote, Isaiah 38, chapter 8, or verse 8. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backward. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. So if the sun is going normally, it passes along the ecliptic here, and we see it rise in the east and come over to the west, right? The degrees it's going is 180 degrees over this way, 180 degrees this way, a full 360 degrees around the earth. So if it normally travels 180 degrees one direction, he's saying in degrees, it will go 10 degrees backwards. So if you divided this plane into 180 degrees and divided it up with like a protractor or whatever, you could mark how far back the sun went in the sky during the day. So it was going forward like this, and then it appeared to go back in the sky 10 degrees and then went forward. And this happens because what? Because the angel of the Lord, Mars, as I have depicted here, is affecting the rotation of the earth as it passes by. So as Mars passes over, as he says on the nocturnal side here, and the earth is tilted and turns back, the sun appears to change position in the sky. That's what's going on. Boom, boom, pass over. So you have a passing body affecting the orbit of the earth. As you can see, I've got like an ethereal plasma tether here. This would be like the energy pouring into the earth that would manifest in certain areas as thunderbolts coming down from the upper atmosphere. These giant stickman figures that are drawn, these petroglyphs are drawn, all these figures of it's this energy transferred between the two bodies, this electrical dialogue that lights up the earth's plasma shells to discharge bolts, blasts, fire from heaven. As we learned from the book of Helaman previously, when it, quote, appeareth unto man that the sun standeth still, unquote, it is because the rotation of the earth is changed. And I have the quote there from Helaman 12:13-15. Yea, and if he say unto the earth, move, it is moved. Yea, if he say unto the earth, thou shalt go back, that it lengthen out the day for many hours, it is done. And thus, according to his word, the earth goeth back, and it appeareth unto man that the sun standeth still. Yea, and behold, this is so. For surely it is the earth that moveth, and not the sun. So it's not the sun going back, like we said. This planet is affecting the earth to the effect, affecting the earth, causing us to see the sun appear to stand still. That's what he's saying. And if it's by the voice of the Lord, this is interesting. I'm just thinking of this out loud now. He's saying, he shall command it, right? The voice of by his word shall the earth go back. Well, this was the messenger. And the voice in the word would be the dialogue, the electrical dialogue sound, the sounds, the trumpet blast, the groaning of the earth, all of these words, the Yahweh, all these things that were projected to the earth because of electrical dissonance or harmonies that were produced as these two bodies brushed by each other, passed over. The language that the earth shall reel to and fro as a drunkard attests to this type of movement as stars fall or are hurled to the earth. So imagine Mars as a star falling or a star hurled to the earth, right? It's affecting and causing the earth to wobble to and fro, changing how we see the sun in the sky, the moon in the sky. And if the tail were to cover the moon in its veil, in its train, well, then the moon would appear red and dusty, right? This planet might even push the moon close to proximity to the earth and it would start to glow incandescent and be filled with glory, like light on fire. That the moon might be like a ringing rim. Or your brakes that you would see in a race car as it brakes on the tracks. You can look through the spokes of the wheel and see the red hot rotors and pads and all of that mechanism trying to slow down all that energy. Right, the Earth and the Moon are like that. The Moon is like a buffer. I see it as like a brake almost. And so as these passovers happen, the Moon is affected, either covered in the dust and being affected by that, or like I just was going through rambling, that it might actually glow a flame as it approaches the earth, like heat, like friction between two objects causes heat. That's what the moon could turn incandescent in my mind as. The language that the earth shall reel to and fro as a drunkard. Okay, I read that, sorry. So yeah, stars falling to the earth and causing the earth to reel to and flow. It's planetary encounter. This is what I talk about all the time. This is catastrophe. In Isaiah 24, here I have an example of this, right? I'm going to point it out. Isaiah 24, verses 18-23. It reads, and it shall come to pass. Hold on, what time is it? Okay, I almost got to go soon. And it shall come to pass that he who fleeth from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit. And he that cometh up out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare. For the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. Now I said, here I have this highlighted in a yellow box. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro and shall be removed. So here you have verses 19 and 20. After he's talking about the windows from on high are open and the foundations of the earth do shake. So you have this cosmic introduction. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard and shall be removed like a cottage. So changed in its place. And the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again. 21. And it shall come to pass in that day, the Lord shall punish the hosts of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth, and the kings upon the earth. So he's talking about the different planets and the stars, and all of them are going to appear to be in calamity, in fight, in war, a war in heaven, essentially, a war amongst the celestial bodies, as they will be hurled down to the earth. And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days they shall be visited. And the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, and the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously. So all these things, the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed. This is a rearranging of heaven and earth, rolling them up as a scroll back into a heap as they were before the flood, as they were under a Saturnian reign, where there was paradise, perpetual growth, all kinds of other things. So this same language is used in latter-day warnings of the second coming and the destruction that precedes it, just as in Isaiah's day. So let's see section 88 and 29 of the Doctrine and Covenants especially. I would say read them both with this catastrophic eye and comparing it to how Isaiah is describing his day and the commotions of Uzziah and Ahaz and Hezekiah. They're all the same. They're precursors to what we will experience. And here I have a picture of Doctrine and Covenants section 88 and parallel side by side, my favorite image, the top-down view of the conference center and the symbol of the Alpha and the Omega, this Saturnian wheel and congregation. For Doctrine and Covenants 88, verses 87 through, looks like 91. For not many days hence, and this is modern revelation, guys. This is right in pattern, in sync, coherent. It's not skipping a beat from what we were just reading with Isaiah. For not many days hence, and the earth shall tremble and reel to and fro as a drunken man, and the sun shall hide his face, and shall refuse to give his light. And the moon shall be bathed in blood, and the stars shall become exceedingly angry, and shall cast themselves down as a fig that falleth from off a fig tree. And after your testimony cometh wrath and indignation upon the people. For after your testimony cometh the testimony of earthquakes, that shall cause groanings in the midst of her. And men shall fall upon the ground and shall not be able to stand. And also cometh the testimony of the voice of thunderings, and the voice of lightnings, and the voice of tempests, and the voice of waves of the sea heaving themselves beyond their bounds. How many times was voice just repeated there? How many times have we discovered in our catastrophic view of things and happenings that these lightnings from heaven, from cosmic bodies, are accompanied with a voice, with a sound, with a terrible din, as Velikovsky says. 91. And all things shall be in commotion, and surely men's hearts shall fail them, for fear shall come upon all people. This fits with the princes of the the king of Ornan at the threshing floor, having seen the angel with his sword drawn over Jerusalem, hiding their faces in fear. This fits with what Elijah and the people witnessed as the blast came down and all of them fell in fear in their faces. Before the rash of Uzziah, the people ran to the mountains and the caves, for fear came upon them. This is a reoccurring theme, a catastrophic theme that is common. It is not beyond the mark. It is the mark. To combine these things and see the signs and see the plan of salvation for what it is the spirit and gift of prophecy. 92. An angel shall fly through the midst of heaven, crying with a loud voice, sounding the trump of God, saying, prepare ye, O inhabitants of the earth, for the judgment of our God is come. Behold, and lo, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And immediately there shall appear a great sign in heaven, and all people shall see it. Velikovsky argues that this sign, in the rotation of the earth and the destruction of Sennacherib's army by fire from heaven, occurred on the first day of Passover in the days of Isaiah. March 23rd, 687 BC, Passover, right? We are expecting the second coming and all those things to happen as well, equally, around Passover. This symbol is a symbol of Passover. It's all the great sign. This is the glory of the Lord that shall be seen by all, that President Nelson repeatedly mentioned a few times in his last talk here that we just had. He's talking about this sign that all shall see together, right? The glory of the Lord, how great it is. The returning Shekinah, the actual power connecting heaven and earth, showing the world that Israel has authority, that the temples of our God are the true temples of Jehovah, of Jesus Christ, of the resurrection, and the millennium that we look forward to. This is a significant harmony, given our synchronization of this sign and symbol and destruction as a type of the second coming and the final burning and judgment. The great and terrible day of the Lord is the day of resurrection, which the Easter Passover season represents. Deliverance. Here's an image I included of Hezekiah and the sundial. And you can see the old school sundial type. It's like a pillar, an obelisk. Freudian interpretists and lazy saints will be like, oh, it's all phallic. It's all phallic. It's all phallic. It's all Freudian misinterpretation of what is really going on. Velikovsky devotes many pages to citing contemporary sources that attest to the sun being disturbed in its motion around the same time as the blast that destroyed the Assyrian who advanced upon Jerusalem. Many of those sources confirm that the angel of the Lord, or the agent of these catastrophic messages and visitations, was the planet Mars. He highlights how it was during these planetary visits, close passes, and electrical conjunctions that the mythology and foundation of Rome was established. It all lines up. I've got to go pick up my son from school. I'm going to pause it here. You get a 5-second break, go get a drink, go to the bathroom. I'll be back to continue with this subheading titled Lucifer, the Morning Star. Boom, back again. So another significant insight that a restored cosmic layer of the gospel identifies in Isaiah and in all prophecy is found in the association of Lucifer with the planet Venus, known as the morning and evening star. This might seem confusing that Venus is associated with a fallen angel, granted that the Israelites coming out of Egypt in the mid-2nd millennia BC venerated Venus as their deliverer from their bondage. But zoom out and take in the bigger picture. It's about applying the premortal archetype of the fall of Satan from a position of great authority among the council of heaven to the damned exiled ruler of the pit of hell. And I've got a link to, it looks like this is the Gospel Topics essay on the council in heaven, for anybody unfamiliar with that. But obviously, Lucifer was present and in a high position to essentially position himself to become the savior, but under his own conditions, destroying the agency of man, or seeking to do so, and to take the glory of the Father upon himself, kind of by force. So he is cast out, and from that high position down to a lower position in the pit of hell. So we can, it's about applying that archetype to multiple layers of understanding. So this fall of Satan archetype. Let's first examine Isaiah's famous Lucifer lines to the king of Babylon, predicting his future downfall in tandem with the Institute Manual's explanation to establish our milk and honey layers. We read from Isaiah chapter 14. The whole chapter fits this context, and I encourage you to read the whole chapter 14 on your own after studying this out, just to verify for yourself. But we'll snip this relevant part here. And I have it kind of clipped out. Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 15. Let's read them. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. I will ascend high above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And now I've got one of the references here, 12c. So we go to verse 12, reference C under Lucifer. What does it say in our Bible or in our scriptures? Hebrew for morning star, son of dawn, the ruler of the wicked world, and they have in parentheses Babylon, is spoken of as Lucifer, the ruler of all wickedness. Topical guide, the devil. So again, they're pointing right to Lucifer, but also that he's known as the morning star. Here is what our Institute Manual instructs regarding these verses. So if you go to the Institute Manual studying the Old Testament, the sections on Isaiah, and here's what it says. In 14:14, a voice of warning to the wicked, Isaiah chapters 13 through 23 in the Institute Manual. Isaiah again uses dualism. The question they pose and that they're answering is, who was Lucifer, son of the morning? Isaiah again uses dualism. Chapters 13 and 14 describe the downfall of Babylon, both of Babylon as an empire and of Babylon as the symbol of the world. Thus, most scholars think Lucifer, the son of the morning, is the king of Babylon, probably Nebuchadnezzar. In the symbolic use of Babylon is a spiritual wickedness in the kingdom of Satan. Lucifer is Satan. This interpretation is confirmed in Latter-day Revelation. See Doctrine and Covenants 76, verses 26 through 28. Satan and Babylon's prince, both represented by Lucifer in this passage, aspire to take kingly glory to themselves, but in fact will be thrust into hell, where there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Compare Isaiah 14:13-14, with Moses 4:1-4, where Lucifer's condition for saving all men are given. And this is what he's saying, that not one of them will fail. He's going to bring them all, but that the glory of God be all his. Right? That's where those conditions are given. What adds to the power of the imagery is the fact that the word congregation in verse 13 is translated by Kil and Delich as the assembly of gods. And this fits with our Kima Kessel conversation of earlier, the heap and the congregation of planets, the same idea. Because the same language is used in terms of talking about the planets and the stars, setting himself above the throne of God, the throne, stars, heart, morning, everything. It's all cosmic, heights of the clouds. So, and in the north, right? Using the help of our Institute manual, we see that Isaiah's symbolism and proverb employs the premortal archetype of Lucifer's downfall from the council in heaven, and it is applicable to two distinct future layers and time periods of interpretation. So here's what our Institute manual is telling us. This is according to me. I made this right here. Number one, a layer of mortal kingdoms and order, circa 539 BC when this is happening, a future collapse of the literal Babylonian kingdoms, right? And also two, a layer of spiritual kingdoms or order at the second coming, a future collapse of the spiritual kingdom of Satan, Babylon, when he is bound at the millennium. So those are the two layers. Talking about something happening in Isaiah's day or shortly thereafter, 539 BC, and the collapse of the Babylonian kingdoms. He's predicting the downfall of Lucifer there. But also the spiritual Babylon and the second coming. These are the two advents he's kind of paralleling, the dualism that the Institute manual is talking about. Here's a visual of this. So we have Isaiah 14. The archetype is war in heaven, right? Lucifer's premortal fall from the council in heaven. He has aspirations to take kingly glory to himself. And then in Moses 4:1-4, I took a quote out that says, "Wherefore give me thine honor." And here's Lucifer, a depiction of him. I think it might even be the Gustave Doré version of him falling from heaven to earth or to the underworld, to the pit, to hell. And then here are the two layers that we have. So one layer is mortal kingdoms. Lucifer is equal to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar in this case. So it's predicting and talking about, symbolizing the downfall of Babylon circa 539 BC. Babylon's fall from world military dominance, imposed agency, right? They fall from that. He's also talking about layer, the spiritual kingdoms, where Lucifer is Satan. And the downfall of spiritual Babylon occurs at the millennium, second coming of Jesus Christ. Satan's fall from world dominance, world spiritual dominance. Again, destruction of agency or imposed agency. It's a continuation of the premortal archetype of the battle in heaven before, where agency, imposed or given freely, were the two options, right? So here's that dualism happening in Babylon in that day of Isaiah or shortly thereafter, and then happening at the second coming as the spiritual application. Now, our restored cosmism perspective enhances the number of layers that become evident to our understanding. A third layer of planetary kingdoms and order rises to the surface when our cosmic filter is applied. A layer that would have been time period relevant to Isaiah and those he prophesied to in his context. An anchored understanding to the literal cosmic nature of Isaiah's symbolism would have made his warnings of their future fulfillments that much more heart-piercing. So I've adjusted the image now to include this third layer. So here we have the same archetype of a war in heaven and Lucifer falling from a high position, from the council in heaven, from the congregation, the council of gods. And underneath, we have the same ones we went over, the downfall of Babylon and the downfall of spiritual Babylon at the millennium. But here's the new planetary layer that the cosmism, this cosmic perspective is showing. So the layer is planetary kingdoms, where Lucifer isn't the king of Babylon or Satan, but Venus, the morning star. And it's talking about the rise and fall of Venus, or the changing of ages from the Bronze to the Iron Age, where it switches from Venus to Mars. Venus, once being at the heart of the polar configuration, or the throne of planets, sought to take a position higher than the sun, and was cast down by Mars to stay near the horizon as the morning and evening star. In the underworld of planets, if you're talking about the gas giants being the upper world and the inner planets being the underworld, right? In that layer of planetary kingdoms here in our solar system, relevant to us. So there you have it. 3 applications of Lucifer, both as the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, both as Satan in the premortal and in the spiritual kingdoms that we are fighting now up through to the millennium, where he will be banished and chained. And the third is the planetary layer, where Lucifer is literally Venus, the planet, the morning star, the agent of all of these Passovers and chaos, and the object upon which Israel predicated its worship and idolatry in direct defiance of the law and teachings of Moses. That even with these types of symbols amongst you and showing plainly from the heavens, these signs and wonders in the heavens that are manifested to you from the very throne of God, that even with those, that we should know and worship Jesus the Christ, Jehovah, the Son of God, who commands those planets, who commands those things, who is the very power through which they are transfigured and resurrected themselves. There are two sections from Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision that will help us fill out this insight that we're uncovering here. We'll start with the section titled Venus Becomes the Morning Star. Since the latter part of the 8th century before the present era, Venus has followed an orbit between Mercury and Earth, which it has maintained ever since. It became the morning and evening star. Seen from the Earth, it is never removed more than 48 degrees. When at its eastern and western elongation, meaning whether you see it in the morning or in the evening, it's always within 48 degrees of the horizon, or 3 hours and a few minutes east or west of the sun. The dreaded comet became a tame planet. It has the most nearly circular orbit among the planets. The end of the terror which Venus kept alive for 8 centuries after the days of the Exodus was the inspiration for Isaiah when he said, quote, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." End quote. And now, obviously, Velikovsky's attributing Isaiah's inspiration to that, to previous catastrophes in the planet Venus. And yes, that is a layer. But I would argue from a Latter-day Saint perspective that obviously the primal, the more primordial, the earlier archetype is that of Lucifer and the council in heaven, the one that is given plainly to us from the Institute Manual, right? That is the primary archetype that even Isaiah is truly drawing upon, but that it is a relevant layer that's obvious given the context, as Velikovsky's pointing out, that Lucifer in this was pointing directly to this transition of solar deities amongst all of the heathens, and that was the temptation of Israel, right? From Venus to Mars to now the stellar sun is the only thing, the sun and the moon, and the earth, right? The sun and the moon and the stars now in the constellations, the astrology of today. Whereas before, these dominant planets which took over and reigned were seen as the sun or the solar era, like the agents of Earth transformation and governance. They were the ones that determined how the Earth spun, how it was tilted, how it lived or died. So that's why we've talked about it before, that the transition of planets from Saturn to Jupiter to Venus to Mars to the sun, right? Like these are known as solar ages in antiquity and mythology, comparative mythology, and things like that, in creation myth. But they're also kind of dispensations, and I can't remember where I was going with that, but I lost my thought. Anyways, so let's continue reading. The Septuagint and Vulgate both translate morning star or Lucifer. What does it mean? That the morning star was assailing the heavens and rising high, and that it was cut down low to the horizon and would weaken no more the nations, ? More than 100 generations of commentators, I said ? Oh my gosh. More than 100 generations of commentators have occupied themselves with this passage, but have met with failure. Why? It is also asked, should the beautiful morning star, called Lucifer, the light bearer, live in the imagination of peoples as an evil power, a fallen star? What is in this lovely planet that makes her name an equivalent to Satan, or Seth of the Egyptians, the dark power? In his confusion, Origen wrote this question to the quoted verses of Isaiah, quote, "Most evidently by these words is he shown to have fallen from heaven, who formerly was Lucifer, and who used to arise in the morning. For if, as some thinks, he was a nature of darkness, how is Lucifer said to have existed before? Or how could he arise in the morning, who had himself nothing of the light?" Lucifer was a feared prodigy in the sky. And see, the answer to Origen from Latter-day Saint doctrine is that, well, because he was a spirit child of our Heavenly Father in a high position, like unto Christ, who had fallen from that position. So yes, he's a child of light who has fallen. And this is where all the other Christians are like, oh my gosh, the Mormons believe that Satan and Lucifer is Jesus' brother. Oh, how evil, right? But that's exactly how all of the ancients saw this archetypal counterpoint, this polarity play out even amongst siblings and the divine siblings. It's the same. Velikovsky continues, Lucifer was a feared prodigy in the sky, and its origin, as illuminated in this book, explains how it became to be regarded as a dark power and a fallen star. After a great struggle, Venus achieved a circular orbit and a permanent place in the family of planets. During the perturbations which brought about this metamorphosis, Venus also lost its cometary tail. In the valley of the Euphrates, Venus then gives up her position as a great stellar divinity, equal with the sun and moon, and joins the ranks of the other planets. A comet became a planet. Venus was born as a comet in the second millennium before the present era. That's Velikovsky's idea and theory, and again, this would in a Saturnian polar configuration, being born mean it came out of the position of the heart position, the ab heart under Saturn in the center place, in the immovable place, where it wasn't moving in the north and stood fixed, to become moving and then be pushed out into the underworld, essentially, away, far away. So Venus was born a comet in the second millennium before the present era. In the middle of that millennium, it twice made contact with the Earth and changed its cometary orbit. In the 10th to 8th centuries of the first millennium, it was still a comet. What caused such further changes in the motion of Venus in the first millennium that it became a planet on a circular orbit? So he's now asking, like, what caused all this change? So I'm quoting him now, after a great struggle, Venus achieved a circular orbit and a permanent place in the family of planets. A comet became a planet. This is Velikovsky's language describing how Venus became the morning star. Venus, originating from a position associated with the gas giants, Saturn and Jupiter, on high, it wreaked havoc on the lesser planets. Now, let me just stop right there. Let me read this again. Venus, originating from a position associated with the gas giants. I'm saying this vaguely because in theory, Saturnian theory, in this alternative world of theory, there are lots of valid theories that you should keep open, hold in your hands, and just watch and see how things unravel as more information is gathered, right? One of them is the Thunderbolt's view of a Saturnian polar configuration where Venus was there, like always there in the beginning. It wasn't necessarily birthed. It was just in a position in the middle that when it moved, it appeared as if it was born and became alive as a comet. Velikovsky posits that it was born out of Jupiter, or others say out of Saturn itself, or some other entrance or birth that Venus burst upon the scene at a later date and caused havoc and was the agent of the Exodus and other disasters and things like that. So I'm saying this to include that whether Venus actually was born out of the red spot of Jupiter, or whether Venus was already born hot and covered in an active Birkeland current from the time of Adam to Noah, and then released from that. So it was like it was born and hot and in a position of being illuminated on high, right? A son of the morning, the light bearer, right there is the crown above Mars in the polar configuration. I don't know. I don't know which one it is, and I'm undecided, but I keep all of them open. All of them fit within the gospel context, and it's going to be a delight to see. I imagine the records that are sealed in the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon having to do with the creation and the mysteries and things like this will more plainly state the history of the planets and their journey through the plan of salvation as well. But that's what I'm expressing here. So let me read it one more time. Venus, originating from a position associated with the gas giants, Saturn and Jupiter, or on high, wreaked havoc on the lesser planets in a brilliant cometary display. Hence, the title Light Bearer, and the association between Venus and Prometheus, who is the one who brings fire to humans, right? And it is associated with the same time frame, as Velikovsky pointed out before, that it was thought that the myth of Prometheus was happening at the same time as the Exodus of Moses, and that Moses was seen as this Prometheus, being able to command the pillar of fire, etc., and that the new strange oil fire that came down was this new light and life force and substance that we even use today to propel our chariots along the freeway. So it wreaked havoc associated between Venus and Prometheus in the days of Moses. Eventually, Venus was contained with a circular orbit in the underworld and lost its cometary countenance. The analogy with Lucifer is clear. Once holding a high position in the heavenly council on high, he was banished to the underworld for rebellion and seeking glory. And here's a position that shows the circular orbit of Venus and Earth's views and where their space are. It's because of Venus's new orbit, it appears as either the morning or the evening star, depending on which time of the year we see it. So it's the evening star. I can't remember what part of the year, and I'm drawing a blank. And the morning star, what is it right now? It's the evening star now. So probably for us in the northern hemisphere, in the winter, she's the evening star, and in the spring, the morning star. The next section, or in the summer, or whenever they switch. In the next section, I'd like to tie in. The next section I'd like to tie in is titled Lucifer Cut Down, where Mars enters the picture as the deliverer and hero. Mars takes over as the terror of the skies and the god of war and violence as Venus settles into a more distant position from Earth than it held during the second millennium BC. So Mars comes in as like the Christ-like figure casting down Satan to the underworld, or Michael as the archangel. And Mars is associated with Michael the archangel, which is interesting, and Venus with Noah. So there's very they're the guardians of Israel, as Venus and Noah, Michael and Gabriel. Maybe I read about this and I'm just going to be redundant again, but maybe not. I don't think I fleshed it out enough. I don't want to get into the archangels conversation until we've gone over the basic, like the foundation of cosmism. So, all right. So let's read it. Lucifer Cut Down, Worlds in Collision. We're almost done here for this edition. We'll stop at the end of Isaiah and pick it up again in our next episode with the Book of Mormon prophets Lehi and Nephi. So it's going to be exciting. Lucifer Cut Down. It can be said that the planet Mars saved the terrestrial globe from a major catastrophe by colliding with Venus. Since the days of Exodus and Joshua, Venus was dreaded by the peoples of the earth. For about 700 years, this terror hung over mankind like a sword of Damocles. Human sacrifices were made to Venus in both hemispheres in order to propitiate her, or to satisfy her. After centuries of terror, one sword of Damocles was removed from above the heads of mankind, only to be replaced by another. Mars became the dread of the peoples, and its return was feared every 15 years. Before this, Mars had absorbed the blow, even the repeated blows of Venus, and had saved the Earth. Venus, which collided with the Earth in the 15th century before the present era, collided with Mars in the 8th century. At the time, Venus was moving at a lower elliptical velocity than when it first encountered the Earth. But Mars, being only about 1/8 the mass of Venus, was no match for her. It was therefore a notable achievement that Mars, though thrown out of the ring, nevertheless was instrumental in bringing Venus from an elliptical to a nearly circular orbit. Looked at from the Earth, Venus was removed from a path that ran high to the zenith and over the zenith to its present path, in which it never retreats from the sun more than 48 degrees, thus becoming a morning or an evening star that precedes the rising sun or follows the setting. The awe of the world for many centuries, Venus became a tame planet. So he's just saying Mars acted like a bull and pushing Venus into a place that made it safe from Earth, but brought us into destruction by Mars and the clouds and debris following him, broken off of him probably in his clashes with Venus. That's why he's the scarred planet as well. When you look at the Valley Marineris, largest canyon, like the Grand Canyon, it is not. Just look at the elevations on it. That's a mystery to astronomers even today. And when I took astronomy in college, they had no answer for it, and they were like, "Oh, look how amazing! It's weird. Must have been budget trillion years that had to happen." They just keep extending the time frame, and you can fudge the numbers and make it happen however you want it to happen. But according to the ancients, according to Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? That's a documentation of these battles between Mars and Venus, of them in the sky. It's what causes the birth of Rome here. It's this era that all of these myths are being born and created out of what was observed by all people in the sky. The war in heaven. I lost my place. Where were we, Leland? Isaiah, referring figuratively, right here. Isaiah, this third paragraph. No, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Isaiah, referring figuratively to the king of Babylon, who destroyed cities and made the land into a wilderness, uttered his remarkable words about Lucifer that fell from heaven and was cut down to the ground. The commentators recognized that behind these words applied to the king of Babylon must have been some legend about the morning star. The metaphor regarding the king of Babylon implied that his fate and the fate of the morning star were not dissimilar. Both of them fell from on high. But what could have meant that the morning star fell from the heights? Asked the commentators. Significant are the words of Isaiah about the morning star, that it weakened the nations before it was cut down to the ground. It weakened the nations in 2 collisions with the earth, and it weakened the nations by keeping them in constant fear for centuries. The book of Isaiah in every chapter provides abundant evidence that with the removal of Venus, so that it no longer crossed the orbit of the earth, danger was not eliminated, but became even more threatening. The book of Isaiah, like I said, I'm just repeating him because this is the big takeaway from that section for me. The book of Isaiah provides abundant evidence that with the removal of Venus, so that it no longer crossed the orbit of the Earth, danger was not eliminated, but became even more threatening. The visits by Mars were more unpredictable and frequent. There is so much more to explore concerning the book of Isaiah with a cosmic filter, but what has been presented so far is more than abundant to once again claim a successful acid test and continue on in our chronological examination. One last note. Tradition and pseudepigraphal texts like the Ascension of Isaiah, I recommend listening to that. It's quick. You can listen to it in maybe 45 minutes, if I remember correct. It's maybe that's me on double speed. I don't know, but I love it. So in that text, it claims that Isaiah was sawn asunder, meaning cut in half, by the wicked king Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, and one of the worst idolaters of all of Israel, and who had become possessed by the spirit of the demon Beliar, or Satan. That, according to the Ascension of Isaiah, Beliar possesses Manasseh as he martyrs Isaiah. The account rings of a semi-transfiguration that mirrors the execution of the prophet Abinadi, whose account we will explore in more detail below or in future podcast episodes here, when he died by fire. Both Abinadi and Isaiah were condemning and prophesying up until the moment they died. So I snipped out this section from the pseudepigrapha, from the Ascension of Isaiah. It's in chapter 5 of it, and let's read it. This is ultimate awesomeness on display in my mind. I love this. Now, let me click it. Let's see. On account of these visions, therefore, Beliar, Satan, was wroth with Isaiah, and he dwelt in the heart of Manasseh, and he sawed him in sunder with a wooden saw. So that's the caption for this chapter. Now the verses 2 through 14. And when Isaiah was being sawn in asunder, Belchira stood up, accusing him, and all the false prophets stood up, laughing and rejoicing because of Isaiah. And Belchira, with the aid of Mechembicus, stood up before Isaiah, laughing, deriding. And Belchira said to Isaiah, Say, I have lied in all, and I have spoken, and likewise the ways of Manasseh are good and right. So they're saying, you tell the king that he's good, right? You've lied in what you've said about him. Rings so similar to how the priests of Noah, the wicked priests of Noah, are like, Noah, he insults you. Don't let this man speak to you like that. It's the same pompous arrogance and evil, spirit. Next verse. And the ways also of Belchira and of his associates are good. Oh, he's telling him, not just the ways of Manasseh are right and good, but also my ways and my friends are good. And this he said to him when he began to be sawn asunder. But Isaiah was absorbed in a vision of the Lord. Interesting way to say that. And though like Stephen, I imagine, I just saw Stephen right now being stoned and absorbed in a vision of the Lord, not even knowing he's getting hit by rocks, right? It doesn't matter. Why? Perhaps because there's a moment of transfiguration before their spirits are taken. This is what I'm suggesting here. So let me read it again. But Isaiah is absorbed in a vision of the Lord. And though his eyes were open, he saw them not. And Belchira spake thus to Isaiah, Say what I say unto thee, and I will turn their hearts, and I will compel Manasseh and the princes of Judah and the people and all Jerusalem to reverence thee. And Isaiah answered and said, So far as I have utterance, I say, Damned and accused be thou and all thy powers and all thy house, for thou canst not take from me aught save the skin of my body. And they seized and sawed in asunder Isaiah, the son of Amos, with a wooden saw. I'm just having this thought now. Maybe perhaps this is, again, why you'd have Moroni and Mormon and all these prophets revere the Abinadi and what they had witnessed with him, especially Alma the Younger, and his position in the conversion and establishment of the church in this land in the Book of Mormon because of Abinadi, and how it's so parallel to Isaiah and their reference for Isaiah. And what is Abinadi speaking to the king of Noah about but the scriptures of Isaiah? So to me, it's beautiful poetry. And Manasseh, and verse 11, and they seized and sawed in asunder Isaiah, the son of Amos, with a wooden saw. 12, and Manasseh and Belchira and the false prophets and princes and all the people of the land stood looking on. 13, and to the prophets who were with him, he said before he had been sawn in asunder, Go ye to the region of Tyre and Sidon, for me only God hath mingled the cup. So he's like, you guys escape with your lives. I'll take this. Verse 14, and when Isaiah was being sawn in sunder, he neither cried aloud nor wept, but his lips spake with the Holy Spirit until he was sawn in twain. Dude, I'm freaking softy today. I love that. And it just rings so true of Abinadi. And we'll get to that again. We'll see that here later. But let's refocus on our timeline for a moment. Here we are. So where's Isaiah? Let's find Isaiah. He's right over here. So we're in about 750 to 700. These are the reign that we're in. Manasseh's about here. And the tribes are carried off. So there's the separations happening in earnest. There's no more northern kingdom, so to speak, organized necessarily for the prophets to preach to. They've all been absorbed by the Gentiles. And here you have the lone southern kingdom now, encroached on, attacked by the Assyrians. Isaiah prophesied against them, catastrophe and judgment against them and their wickedness. And it will just continue to degrade all the way down until you have Jeremiah, who's a sad boy, and continually lamenting about the state and repeated cycle of pride and wickedness he has seen and witnessed and experienced, and also seen in vision that will continue to haunt Israel. So this is the timeline here we're at. Now, what did I say about this? We're going to skip ahead past Jeremiah for now. And I'm sad because I love Jeremiah. As a poet, he wrote so much in terms of Lamentations and Jeremiah. And my music, I feel like, is if there were a Jeremiah type writing or musician today, I feel like I'm feeling that spirit in a sense, and I love it. But so I definitely will have a future essay, I think, just dedicated to my love of Jeremiah and diving with a cosmic lens on him as well. But it's something you can do without waiting on me. So please do. But we're going to jump right into Lehi and the start of the Book of Mormon. So we'll go from King Manasseh to Zedekiah. So here's Manasseh, King Manasseh, and we're going to jump to Zedekiah. So we're going to jump about 50, 60 years again to the future, to Zedekiah. Think of this once again in the context of the scattering of Israel. We just saw Isaiah warning Israel about the Assyrian, and then bam, the 10 tribes are taken captive. Here's a note from me. If you'd like to, again, look at some Electric Universe perspective on how the 10 tribes left or how they'll return, we've already explored some great quotes in our episode number 4 under the title of The Restoration of All Things Cosmology Part 2. And there's a whole section, especially in the audiovisual podcast version, where I go over and read all of the different quotes from early prophets and apostles and members of the church and their speculations about how the 10 tribes were taken off and how they might return. So if they are off-world, they could have left during any of the subsequent close passes or these passovers. If they could be translated up like Elijah during one of those events, or like Moses during a Passover. There are plenty of opportunities for the 10 tribes, or a portion of them, maybe those who go to the north, as we read in the apocryphal book of 2nd Ezra, talks more about that they go escape to a land in the north. And there is a group that does seek to live a pure law of Moses, essentially, or live a Zion-like society and ascend to Zion and do what they had set out to do out of Egypt. And I like to imagine, this is my opinion and personally, like that there is a group out there that did achieve translation unto like Melchizedek and like Enoch, and that perhaps one of these planetary catastrophes we're seeing from the scriptural record was conducive to their translation. I don't know that, though. Again, purely my opinion, and could be totally wrong. Next, Isaiah warned of the future destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. Lehi brings us to the brink of that moment. Lehi, Nephi, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, they were all near contemporaries. Lehi was led to America. Jeremiah remained in Jerusalem. Ezekiel was exiled to Babylon, and Daniel served as a captive in the court of the king of Babylon. So all these prophets are prophesying and given to have their records written and put together for us in these latter days. Why? Because they all have different perspectives that when combined together, they witness to Isaiah's witness. They witness to Amos, to Joel, to all of these prophets. They witness to Jesus Christ. They witness to the second coming and to the gathering and fulfilling of the covenants between Jesus Christ and Israel in the latter days. I love Isaiah. He is the messianic prophet. The more we study Isaiah as a church, and the more we can get over our sad ignorance and our joking nature when we talk about Isaiah, and that how is Isaiah the butt of so many jokes about sleeping through scriptures or not being able to get through them through the second Nephi chapters in the Book of Mormon. How long will we joke about it? We'll joke about it about as long as it takes for the people to understand it, because when you start to understand it, you don't want to joke about it. You want to treat it with the reverence that it is, with the same reverence that you hear Nephi and Jacob speak about it, that you hear Abinadi speak about it, that you hear Jesus Christ himself in 3rd Nephi in his dissension to the Nephites speak about it. The same urgency you hear Moroni speak about it. That's how I feel about it. I feel that same urgency and message in the Doctrine and Covenants, in how the Lord speaks and has spoken to his latter-day prophets and how he is speaking and leading and guiding us now through President Russell M. Nelson. He is an Amos. He is a Joel. He is an Isaiah on the watchtower. And he has commanded us to seek the Lord and our covenants. For there is a great and terrible day, a rash, a commotion, a turning upside down of the earth, a shaking of the foundations of heaven. There is a burning, a conflagration that comes. And safety is found in Christ. I love you guys. Let's end it there. We'll pick this back up again, jumping in Lehi right away.